Good afternoon and welcome to the National Capital Planning Commission. This is, for the record, this is the July 13th, 2017 meeting. We do have a quorum. I'll note that we barely have a quorum. So,
don't go anywhere.
yeah, so you're all tied to your chairs. I'll also say that this is a very long agenda, and the conditions are right for this to be the longest meeting we've had in years. Quite literally, the amount of time we're here, though, is dependent entirely upon you.
No pressure.
I will say that Ms. White and I have planes and trains to catch at day's end, so we may scoot you along. Agenda item number 1 is report of the chairman. Now I'll note that Congressman Trey Gowdy of South Carolina is the new chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. And the chair of this committee serves, that is him, he serves as ex officio. He has designated Katie Bailey, Patrick Hardaby, and Kevin Ortiz to serve as alternates. Agenda item number 2 is a report of the Executive Director, Mr. Acosta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief today. Just one announcement. We'd like to welcome David Lipscomb to NCPC as a summer intern. He'll work in our Office of Public Engagement on our new website and public outreach plan or participation plan. David is a Master of Community Planning student at the University of Maryland and previously worked in journalism and communications for over 10 years. So welcome to David. And you do have a written report, and that concludes my presentation for today.
Thank you, Mr. Acosta. Any questions for Mr. Acosta? Agenda item number 3 is the legislative update. Ms. Schuyler.
I have nothing to report, Mr. Chairman.
Agenda item number 4 is the consent. There's nothing going on in Washington. So. Yeah. Agenda item number 4 is the consent calendar. We have 3 items. Item 4A is the rehab of the U.S. Marine Corps War Memorial located in Arlington. It's brought to us by the National Park Service. Item 4B is the rehab and addition of Building 245, the Radiation Physics Lab at NIST on the campus located in Gaithersburg. That is brought to us by the Department of Commerce. Agenda item 4C is for the P6000 Vehicle Operations Addition at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. It's brought to us by the Department of the Navy. Are there any questions on any item on the consent calendar? Hearing none, is there a motion on the consent calendar?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the consent calendar say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Agenda item 5A is comments on the President Roosevelt prayer plaque at the World War II Memorial proposed by the National Park Service. And we have Ms. Spiegel. And then we also will have, I think, one public commenter, public speaker. Ms. Spiegel, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The National Park Service, on behalf of the Friends of the World War II Memorial, has submitted design concepts for the President Franklin D. Roosevelt prayer plaque for your review and comment. In June of 2014, Congress passed Public Law 113-123, which directs the Secretary of the Interior to install a suitable plaque or inscription within the area of the World War II Memorial with the words that President Franklin D. Roosevelt prayed on D-Day. The World War II Memorial was constructed in 2004 and honors the 16 million who served in U.S. Armed Forces during the Second World War. Here you see the primary memorial precinct. The area in red between the Atlantic Arch and Constitution Gardens is known as the Circle of Remembrance. It is part of the World War II Memorial grounds and was designed to be a quiet counterpoint to the grand and bustling space at the center of the memorial. The Circle of Remembrance was selected as the general site for the FDR prayer plaque by the Commission in November 2015. The Commission of Fine Arts and the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission, or NCMAC, also supported this location. D-Day, one of the deadliest days of the war, launched the Allied invasion in an effort to liberate mainland Europe from Nazi control. The night before, Americans clustered around radios in offices, factories, and homes, listening to news from across the Atlantic. President Roosevelt sought to calm an anxious nation as tens of thousands of American and Allied forces besieged the coast of Normandy. FDR's prayer with the nation, shown on the right, broadcasted on D-Day, June 6, 1944, is roughly 500 words in length and was spoken in a slow and deliberate cadence as the nation contemplated the day of the invasion. To provide a brief process overview, Congress authorized the installation of President Roosevelt's prayer within the vicinity of the World War II Memorial with Public Law 113-123. The law states that the Commemorative Works Act, or CWA, applies to the site selection and design of the plaque. The CWA is a federal law that guides the memorial's process in D.C. With the Department of Interior's approval, the general site selection came before NCMAC, CFA, and NCPC in 2015. Last year, CFA and NCPC commented on the specific site location within the Circle of Remembrance. The Commission is now commenting on the design before the applicant continues design development. CFA has already reviewed and commented on the design, and in the future, the design will return to our Commission for approval. From the four site alternatives presented in 2015, the Commission supported selecting Site A, the Circle of Remembrance, for the FDR prayer plaque. Here you see the Circle of Remembrance within the World War II Memorial context, as well as its adjacency to Atlantic Arch. In December 2016, the National Park Service and the Friends of the World War II Memorial, with the assistance of Ohm von Sweden, the landscape architects for the World War II Memorial grounds, established the following criteria for evaluating the design alternatives. The first four relate to locating the D-Day prayer at the Circle of Remembrance, and the last four relate to the aesthetics and visitor experience. Staff supported these criteria, particularly for the site to provide opportunities for contemplation and for the design to align with the primary memorial precinct. The existing material palette at the Circle of Remembrance consists of rusticated fieldstone retaining walls and Victorian park benches, very similar in character to Constitution Gardens. However, these materials are unlike the primary memorial precinct, which consists of various types of granite and metal embellishments. As we look at the design alternatives, it's important to keep in mind that in addition to the prayer plaque, they include modifications to the retaining wall, benches, pavers, and vegetation within the Circle of Remembrance. These changes complement the character of the primary memorial precinct per the original design intent. In December 2016, the Commission supported Alternative 2, which located the freestanding prayer plaque in a manner that completes the geometric form of the Circle of Remembrance. Alternative 2 was commented on more favorably than Alternative 1, which located the plaque just outside of the circle. This rendering of Alternative 2 shows the curved plaque and granite walls separated from the retaining wall and benches by two pedestrian pathways. Visitors could stand close to the plaque to read the inscription from within the Circle of Remembrance while viewing the primary memorial precinct. Since 2016, the applicant has revisited the design and is returning to the Commission for comments on design alternatives. So today you will be commenting on two design alternatives, A and B. The two alternatives are shown here within the greater context of the World War II Memorial. Both A and B provide a visual connection to the memorial while viewing the plaque, a criterion previously established by the applicant. Staff notes that both alternatives have positive qualities and that either A or B could be developed as an appropriate design for the Circle of Remembrance. These diagrams show the seating and plaque viewing spaces for the two alternatives, as well as their differences in orientation and siting. Alternative A retains the existing location of the Circle of Remembrance and changes the curvature of the two entry-exit pathways. Staff notes that Alternative B repositions the Circle of Remembrance closer to the existing pedestrian path. So the existing Circle of Remembrance location is shown as in this dashed red line. This alternative also eliminates one of the two entry-exit pathways, and both of these modifications reduce impervious surface area, but may impact the existing landscape and vegetation. Looking closer at alternative A, staff notes that it is very similar to the alternative supported by the commission last year. The design features a freestanding plaque within the circle of remembrance, which completes the geometric form of the circle. The symmetrical design is inspired by the World War II memorial. Alternative A has a greater seating and standing capacity than alternative B, which includes a total of 4 wheelchair spaces. It retains existing circulation and visitation patterns, and the 2 entry-exit points provide flexible circulation, but the existing pathways may be too close to the plaque viewing and contemplation area. The plaque is prominently located and clearly distinguished from the circle. The plaque height is at 3 feet, and it is differentiated from the lower 2-foot-tall retaining walls and benches. Gaps within the retaining wall allow for views into the landscape and diminish the monolithic sense of the wall. The style and character is similar to the World War II memorial, but the symmetry may be unnecessary. Looking closely at alternative B, the design features the plaque integrated with the form of the circle. The asymmetrical design is inspired by landscape elements. Alternative B has less seating and standing capacity than alternative A, including a total of 2 wheelchair spaces. It modifies existing circulation and visitation patterns, and the single entry-exit point may be too close to the plaque viewing and contemplation area. The plaque is prominently located within the overall design gesture. The retaining wall begins at a height of 18 inches here on the right and spirals upward to 3 feet in height, where the plaque is located at the spiral's apex. During the consultation process, concerns were raised about the text legibility and technical difficulty of inscribing the prayer onto the plaque's complex curved surface. The designer spoke to metal fabricators and were assured of the technical feasibility. The plaque is not particularly well distinguished from the benches, which also project outward from the retaining wall. The spiraling retaining wall is more monolithic than alternative A, and the design and character is not as closely aligned with the World War II memorial. However, the novel quality and contemporary design enhances the formal relationship with West Potomac Park's landscape. The proposed materials and planting designs are similar for both alternatives A and B. For each alternative, the granite wall, benches, and paving within the circle of remembrance would be complementary to the primary memorial precinct. The applicant is considering using a warm gray color of granite for these elements that would harmonize with the surrounding landscape. The bronze plaque would have a patina similar to the World War II emblem shown down here at the bottom, and any other metal embellishments would complement the primary memorial precinct. And for each alternative, small multi-stem trees provide a sense of enclosure around the circle. Hardy ground covers provide greenery with minimal maintenance, and white flowers in spring and summer symbolize peace. And the final plant selection will be made in coordination with the National Park Service. So in conclusion, it is the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission finds that both alternatives have positive qualities and could be developed as an appropriate design. Notes that alternative A is similar to the alternative supported by the Commission last year. Notes that alternative B repositions the circle of remembrance, modifies circulation, and expresses a different character from the World War II memorial, but finds that alternative B has a distinct contemporary design, prominently locates the plaque, and preserves views. And therefore, the Commission supports alternative B, provided that the applicant addresses improvements to universal accessibility, the plaque design, and the landscape. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions. The National Park Service and Friends of the World War II Memorial, as well as Ohm von Sweden, are also here.
Thank you very much, Ms. Spiegel. We do have one speaker, Mr. Chris Long with the Ohio Christian Alliance. And we do have a copy of your testimony.
Yes.
So, but please proceed. Welcome.
Okay, very good. Thank
happy
you.
to have
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Chris Long. I'm the president of the Ohio Christian Alliance. I would like to thank the Commission for hearing our testimony today on the placement of President FDR's D-Day prayer at the World War II Memorial. Our organization encouraged the legislation that was passed by Congress in 2014 and signed into law by President Obama. S 1044 directs the Secretary of the Interior to install in the area of the World War II Memorial in the District of Columbia a suitable plaque or inscription with the words that President FDR prayed with the nation on the morning of the D-Day landings, June 6, 1944. 3 years have passed since the signing of the legislation. Last year in June, Senator Rob Portman, the Senate sponsor, stated in a letter to Mr. Jarvis, Director of the National Park Service, his concerns that the project would move forward as quickly as possible to honor those veterans who sacrificed their lives for our freedoms, which each day that passes we are losing more and more of the remaining World War II veterans. It is our understanding that last December this commission supported the architectural concept Alternative A, depicted on page 25. Because the freestanding plaque completes the geometric form of the circle, we also support Alternative A for these reasons. The design allows for ingress and egress to access the prayer. The prayer is prominently displayed in this design. It is our view that it provides greater access to visitors as well. There will be groups coming to read the prayer aloud. When President Roosevelt delivered the prayer, it is estimated that 100 million people heard the broadcast worldwide. This prayer speech that the President delivered inspired the nation. The prayer will continue to inspire and to educate the public long after the World War II veterans have gone. It is for this reason that we strongly recommend a design that accommodates the groups of people that will be coming to appreciate these words. Additionally, the design Alternative A is consistent with the design of the World War II Memorial itself. Alternative B, however, presents challenges of accessibility as it only has one walkway and one entrance into the enclosed circle. It is not as inviting as Alternative A. It also obscures the prayer into the design of the circle reconstruction. The legislation is about the prayer, and that, in our opinion, is where the focus should remain. In addition, the design of Alternative B has somewhat modern appearance inconsistent with the design of the World War II Memorial. It is for these reasons that we support Alternative A with the freestanding symmetrical plaque. It is our hope that the final plans can be approved so that fundraising and construction can commence and a date can be scheduled for the dedication of the prayer at the World War II Memorial. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, for hearing our testimony today. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Long, very much. The matter is back before the Commission for discussion. Mr. May.
Sure. Could you bring up the image that had the two side by side? Oh, Mr. Long, I won't have any questions for you, so.
Okay.
Very good. I don't know
Any other
if anybody else does, but I don't. So.
Very good.
We're
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate everything the staff has put into the report, and I think the report recognizes some of the complications that are associated with each of the designs, and I'm perfectly fine with the EDR as it is written. I wouldn't want to recommend any changes, but I do want to make clear to the Commission that we are still at the concept level on this design, and there are significant things that have to be worked out, frankly, with either alternative. Even if the Commission had recommended Alternative A, I think we have complications associated with that as well. There's a lot of things that we have to balance with it, the ability to bring in large numbers of people, so access to it and sort of smooth flow is an important consideration, because an area of the park that was, or of the memorial that was not previously drawing significant batches of people will now likely have those groups. And so we want to make sure that it's easy for people to flow in and out. We also want to make sure that once they're in there that it's easy to appreciate the prayer. We're balancing all of those things. I think we also need to make sure that we are meeting accessibility standards, and I don't think that we're quite there on Alternative B. I think our position going into this is that we could make either one of them work as a general principle. But I think we have complications with both, and I just want to make sure the Commission understands that we may, although the Commission is supporting Alternative B more explicitly here, we may wind up coming back for when we look for an official approval with something that's looks a bit more like Alternative A, or perhaps looks even a little bit different from this. There are other aspects of this as well, having to do with how quickly we can execute the project, how quickly the funds can be raised, and so on. And of course, this is not something that we're spending money on. We're prohibited from doing that by the law that authorized it. So all the fundraising will be done by the Friends of World War II Memorial, and I believe with some assistance from the Ohio Christian Alliance and perhaps others. So we're just going to have to see how this plays out. But we'll know more, I think, in the fall. So that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? I'm sorry, yeah, Ms. White.
I just have a question for the staff. I don't quite get how Alternative B is better than Alternative A when it comes to circulation. It reduces the number of people who can be accommodated. So
And that is one of the issues that we've recommended to be addressed as the design moves forward. Yeah. I think another positive quality is that it's more contemporary. It's more similar to the landscape of Potomac Park.
If I could add to that, I think, some of this was also discussed at the Commission of Fine Arts. The similarity, it's hard to appreciate here, but if you look at it from much higher up, and you can see this as a piece, not just of the memorial, but also of the rest of West Potomac Art and the Constitution Gardens area, the sort of the curve, the more organic curving pathways as opposed to the rigid geometry of World War II. We're mediating something between those, and I think that's one of the reasons why, at least in plan, Alternative B has a little bit more sympathy for the entirety of the context. The other thing about the accessibility is that because you're entering at one point, it does create more of a reserved space for people to stand and observe the prayer, as opposed to an Alternative A. You can see, those two arrows. Imagine that you've got, 3 or 4 people across walking into that space. It crowds the people who would be reading the prayer.
that helps.
Mr. Chairman? I just wanted to make a clarification. So I think there's some confusion whether it's Alternative A is being supported here. You had reviewed a variation of that last year, and you had provided comments on that concept. So I don't necessarily want to leave you with the opinion that Alternative A is off the table or we don't support that. What we're doing here is Alternative B is new, and that we're essentially providing comments on that scheme. I think we would support Alternative B if it met the criteria or the issues that were articulated in the EDR, which dealt with accessibility and also pedestrian flow, et cetera, et cetera. So those are specific comments because it's a new scheme that they put on the table that we're providing them. When the Park Service returns in the fall with a preliminary application, they'll identify a preferred alternative, and we'll use that as we move forward. So this is just comments on B. You already had made comments on A last year.
Yeah. By itself, it is a little confusing. It looks like we're supporting B when that may not be the case. Right. Please, Mr. Gallus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, none of us can help but not be moved by the prayer itself and what it represented in a time in our country. And so it's humbling to be here to talk about this. The entire memorial itself seems to me is very much not a contemporary design. It feels timeless to me, which I think of as more of a traditional design. And while I understand the notion of connecting it to the rest of the park, I think that I see this as an extension of the memorial more than it is an extension of the park. And so while I appreciate, a move toward a more contemporary sort of curvilinear sort of design in Alternative B, I think that the symmetry of World War II Memorial overall is the thing. It is the main concept by which we connect with it. And so And then if you could go to 17, please. The, one of the things that we're talking about access for alternative A versus B, and what I liked about A is its access. And when I look at alternative B, if we can get it up here, what, there we go, I guess, I don't know. Okay, yeah. It seems to me that there'll be a kind of clogging. If people are trying to come into the space, sometimes people come in busloads. And so there's a group of people together. It's not one person at a time, much as like we're seeing, it might be groups of people. And so there's only one way in. And then it also seems like you're more encouraged to clog around the prayer. That's a technical term, clog. But to get kind of jammed up, and you want to, I've been in those situations, you want to get in so you can actually read it, and it takes some time to read 500 words. So I feel that alternative A better allows that fluidity of movement through the space, and I think that's an important part of what having access not only to the space but to the prayer itself and being able to read the prayer. And that on this one also, I feel like the awkwardness of where the seated area ends, sort of at that nexus with where the bronze plaque begins, creates a sort of a strange space there that it seems unreconciled. I know we're early in design, but it's almost like unnecessary to create such a conflict there. It seems like we're forcing something. So at least those are my comments for alternative B.
Oh, I forgot where it was. Sorry. Oh, gosh, it's hot out.
It's been a tough week.
I agree with everything you said. And I don't understand why does the circle have to be moved, and how many trees, why would we do that and take out a bunch of trees?
Yeah,
And replant?
it's still a little bit unclear exactly what movement might be necessary.
Okay.
But if we bring up the plan, I can show you one of the complications that we show the side by side. There you go. So it's not quite visible, but just outside the trees to the right there, there's what looks like a path, and that's not really a path. That, I believe, is the line of the levee, and we have to keep the levee free of any trees and tree roots. So I think that's one of the things that we're struggling with. We are bound on that side, so we might need to shift or else lose trees. So it's still
Well,
being
I
figured
mean,
out.
fundamentally, I think that the concept of having the circle relate to the rest of the mall doesn't make any sense to me. Conceptually, I think it ought to be of a piece with the memorial, because, yes, it has to fit into the landscape. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the World War II memorial, I must say, but it's here, and we should respect it. I mean, the design of it, I should say, let me be very clear. But it's here, and it needs to be respected, and I would not say adhered to, but I think the conceptual framework that guided the design of the memorial itself needs to be carried through in this addendum. And B doesn't do that. I agree. It definitely feels like a different vocabulary.
Hearing none, is there a motion on the EDR?
So moved.
It's been,
I'm making the motion.
Yep.
Oh, I'm having a hard time today.
it has been a rough week for you. I understand.
Yeah, well, we've had a little bit going on.
Yes. It's been properly moved and seconded. All in favor of the EDR, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you. Agenda item 5B are comments on the conceptual design of the World War I Memorial at Pershing Park. We have Mr. Fliss. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. The National Park Service has submitted concept plans for the National World War I Memorial at Pershing Park here in downtown Washington, D.C. for your review and comment. As you may recall, the Commission reviewed this project back in November of 2016, and the design has been revised since that time in response to Commission comments, those from the Commission of Fine Arts, as well as the public. I'll note that you've received several letters and comments regarding the design, and you should have already received those. Just as a reminder, Congress designated Pershing Park as a National World War I Memorial. That act authorizes the World War I Centennial Commission to honor the service of members of the United States Armed Forces in World War I at Pershing Park. A two-stage competition was held to select the memorial designer, and the winning design, called The Way to Sacrifice by Joseph Weishar and sculptor Sabin Howard, was selected by the Centennial Commission. The public law authorizes the memorial and also states that the Commemorative Works Act applies to the design and approval process. This, as you know, is the federal law that guides the memorial process in the District of Columbia. The Act also provides some guidance regarding the design development, including protecting open space, public use, and cultural and natural resources. At this point in the process, you are providing comments on the concept for the proposed memorial design, and in the future, NPS and the sponsor will return to you, as well as the Commission of Fine Arts, for preliminary and final approval of the memorial. Ultimately, the Centennial Commission and National Park Service will be responsible for constructing and then maintaining the memorial. So moving on to the project location, just as a reminder, Pershing Park is located in downtown Washington, D.C. on Pennsylvania Avenue, just east of the White House. And this is the site here highlighted in red. Again, this is located within the Pennsylvania Avenue National Historic Site, a location of numerous historic and cultural resources, as well as within a resurgent downtown. Here's another diagram showing Pershing Park and its relationship to Pennsylvania Avenue, obviously with the Capitol at one end, linking to the White House on the west. This park block frames one side of the important civic corridor and helps enclose the broad open space created by Freedom Plaza, which is located just to the east. Zooming a little bit further here, you can see the park is bounded by 15th and 14th Streets, and then Pennsylvania Avenue, which is located on both the north and south sides. The site is surrounded to the north by commercial uses, including several hotels. Parks are located, including the Sherman Memorial to the west, Freedom Plaza, as I mentioned, to the east, and then civic uses to the south, including the Commerce Building and the Wilson Building. And here are a few images of the site and its current condition. On the left is a view looking towards the Willard Hotel in the distance, and on the right you can see a view looking towards the Washington Monument. In 1979, the PADC commissioned landscape architect Paul Friedberg to design Pershing Park. Under Friedberg, the park was reimagined as a shaded refuge with waterfall and sunken water feature that transformed into an ice rink in the winter. The park design reflected a desire for seclusion from the noisy streets surrounding the site, while seating, restrooms, and a cafe were also provided. A memorial to General Pershing was also integrated into the park plan. The park was dedicated in 1981, and later the landscape architects of Ohm van Sweden redesigned the planting plan. I will note that the park has been determined individually eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places, and among other things, the determination found the park to be significant at the national and state levels as a signature landscape by Paul Friedberg, a modern landscape architect and urban designer. So given this important historic context, the park's location within the broader framework of Pennsylvania Avenue, as well as its position as an urban park within the fabric of an active downtown, the Commission previously expressed support for several planning and urban design principles related to this project, And these include supporting a memorial design that combines urban park and commemorative features successfully and integrates them in a balanced manner, supported a memorial design that respects the symbolic and civic importance of Pennsylvania Avenue, and also supported strategies that enhance Pershing Park while rehabilitating or reusing elements of the original park design. So here you can see on the screen the design which the Commission reviewed back in November of 2016. This design included a commemorative wall, here located on the west side, a water feature, and then a central lawn. As you may recall, much of the topography and terracing for the existing park was modified or altered. And as you may also recall, this design had already evolved significantly from the competition entry. So here you can see the revised concept design. Other alternatives were also explored but were ultimately dismissed. And this concept essentially starts with the existing park as a baseline and proposes 3 changes, which I'll walk you through. First is with the previous scheme, a bronze bas-relief wall, commemorative wall, is inserted here along the western edge of the sunken plaza. This wall will occupy the location of the existing waterfall element, but it's expanded to the north and south for to be about 65 feet in width. The top of the wall is a pool of water which cascades over the north and south sides, and this water runs down into the pool level below. The second modification is related to the existing pool. It would be retained in plan, but a pathway would be inserted. This would accommodate pedestrian circulation in front of the commemorative wall, and this essentially leads from the east side of the pool across and then turns in front of the wall. And then finally, the last change is the existing cafe kiosk or gazebo is going to be removed, and it's proposed to be replaced with a flagpole which would sit on a circular plinth. So here's a view looking east over the proposed memorial and towards the flagpole in the distance. You can see in the foreground, this is the pool, and then again, here's the new circulation element that's inserted. I'll also note that the revised concept retains the alignment of willow oaks located along the northern edge of the park, which is shown here, and this is consistent with the Pennsylvania Avenue corridor streetscape. This configuration continues to frame views to the U.S. Capitol, and this is consistent with one of your previous requests. So as I mentioned previously, the park has been determined individually eligible for listing in the National Register. The Commission previously requested that plans clearly denote the existing park elements to be retained and or modified, and further explore whether additional features could be reused or rehabilitated, including the steps, planters, and waterfall. And this diagram essentially shows the changes proposed on under the previous concept which you reviewed. And this diagram shows the areas of changes proposed under the revised concept. As you can see, the new design retains much more of the elements of the existing park as compared to the previous design. For example, the previous design altered much of the terracing and topography. Again, the proposed changes are generally limited to these 3 major components. The Commission had previously requested a design alternative to be evaluated that included a restoration and rehabilitation approach with more minimal changes to the existing park. As such, staff recommends the Commission find that the revised scheme does retain more elements of the existing park as compared to the previous design. However, staff does note that additional revisions may be possible which help minimize impacts on the historic fabric of the park while improving both the commemorative and urban park experience. And I'm going to walk you through some of those recommendations. Again, the primary objective of the proposal is the establishment of a memorial to World War I, and this should convey the significance of the war and the scale of American sacrifice. As I mentioned, the bas-relief wall remains the primary commemorative element in the design, and here you can see some of the proposed imagery. The proposed size and scale of the wall has several implications. In particular, the length and height create a visual and physical barrier to the western portion of the site, and this was not present in the original park design. The free flow of space between activity areas is one of the character-defining features of the existing park, and it would be altered under the proposed design. The terracing and plantings also in this area would have to be removed. Here are sections through the park that are looking to the west. with the existing condition on top and the proposed condition on the bottom. You can see the existing water feature, the cascading waterfall, and then under the proposed design, the new bas-relief wall. Again, this would be widened to the width of the sunken plaza. This is a rendered view on the top left here, looking towards the west with the new wall, and then the existing condition here to the bottom. Staff believes that the applicant should consider whether the proposed wall and terracing can be better integrated and therefore avoid appearing as a barrier. Modifications to the design may also allow the steps and seating to expand where appropriate. As such, staff suggests the applicant consider reducing the wall size to improve views across the park and consider opportunities for better integrating the wall into the existing terracing and steps. We acknowledge that the wall should be scaled appropriately to convey the importance and magnitude of the events of World War I, and as the proposal is refined, additional information will be necessary regarding the design of the wall's sculptural and interpretive components. This will help provide an opportunity to understand the scale of the imagery in the text and how they will be experienced by visitors. So moving on to the other side of the park, the existing Pershing Memorial will remain in place and is intended to create a spatial relationship with the new commemorative wall. Previously, the applicant has indicated they will consider ways to improve the legibility of the memorial walls, and this is intended to help improve the visitor's experience. So here you can see the existing walls today, and generally they're in shadow and hard to read often. As such, staff recommends that the Commission support improvements to the legibility of the Pershing walls and requests additional information be provided describing any proposed enhancements. So moving on now to the existing and proposed water features, the revised design, as I mentioned, retains the footprint of the pool and inserts a circulation path to allow pedestrians to view the commemorative wall up close. Here you can see a rendering of the pool the new path with the wall here. And again, the pool footprint is staying the same. This is water here, and the path turns to the right here. The use of water features can help activate public spaces in a positive way. For example, I'll mention the Pershing Park pool converted to an ice rink in the winter under the original design. The pool and waterfall created a pleasant environment while the terrace steps and seating allowed park users direct access to the water. As such, staff recommends the Commission find that the water features can help activate urban park spaces when designed appropriately. However, water features can create a number of challenges ranging from maintenance to functionality and visual impact when they're actually not in use. So here's another view of the proposed path and water features. Again, this is the commemorative wall with a water element on top, and again, this would come down the sides, either side, into channels into the pool. This would be water, and then this darker blue element would be the circulation for pedestrians. The park's original fountain, shown here in the image, provided sound and movement, which were important to the feeling and association of the park. The oasis that was created served as a respite from the surrounding streets. Staff does not believe the proposed water feature in the new design would have the same effect. The inclusion of a cascading water feature could help to break up the size and scale of the commemorative wall, and it could also be used in a way that supports the bas-relief narrative. As such, staff recommends the Commission request the applicant consider integrating a water feature into the commemorative wall consistent with the location and orientation of the existing cascade fountain. Many pools in the region, as I mentioned, are not in use for several months during the winter. The original Pershing Park, again, became an ice rink. In this case, such a use may not be appropriate, but a large empty pool may be detrimental to both the memorial as well as the urban park experience. And given this range of potential issues, staff recommends the Commission request the applicant evaluate the visual and functional impacts of such features when they're both operational and empty of water. And this image shows a few examples of how water features can be treated. Based upon the submission materials, the water depth, pool materials, as well as the pedestrian path remain unclear. The applicant should further develop the proposal while also evaluating pedestrian circulation and safety, including fall protection. As such, staff recommends the Commission request the applicant provide additional details regarding the proposed pool modifications, including the design of the proposed pedestrian path, to demonstrate the impacts of any changes on the character of the pool as well as the visitor experience. And then finally, the existing Pershing Park, as you know, is bounded by berms on the south side, shown in this image. This does create the central space in the sunken plaza, but it also results in several challenges. First, the berms limit views and pedestrian access from the southern portion of the site, including the Commerce and Wilson buildings. In addition, the access points are limited to the corners of the site, which is shown here as you're looking to the northwest. Staff recommends the Commission request the applicant provide alternatives to improve pedestrian access and visibility from the southern perimeter of the site, including widening existing paths and stairs or adding new entry points. Additional wayfinding or directional signage, when appropriately integrated into the landscape, could also be appropriate. And so here again, you can see a view from Pennsylvania Avenue South looking to the north at the side of the berm. Staff also suggests the Commission recommend the applicant continue to evaluate opportunities to increase universal access across the entire site. We acknowledge that the design has changed and additional project development has occurred in response to a number of comments received, including those from the Commission and the public throughout this process, and that continued coordination will continue through both the NEPA and 106 process. Therefore, it is the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission find that the revised scheme retains more elements of the existing park compared to the previous design, requests the commemorative wall be reduced in size to provide better views and integration into the park elements, supports improvements to the legibility of the Pershing Memorial walls, finds that water features can help activate park spaces, requests the applicant continue to evaluate the impact of those water features, requests additional details regarding the pool modifications, and consider integrating a water feature into the commemorative wall consistent with the existing cascade fountain. The Commission also finds the raised berms are fundamental to the original park design, requests the applicant provide alternatives to improve access from the south side of the park, and supports retention of the terracing and steps along Pennsylvania Avenue North. And then finally, requests the plan be prepared to identify urban park spaces and how they can be programmed to support a successful urban park. That concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions. We have members from National Park Service, the World War I Centennial Commission, and their design team here as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fliss. We have two people who have signed up to testify. The first is Ms. Margot Barajas, representing the Cultural Landscape Foundation. Then she will be followed by Darwina Neal. So please, Ms. Barajas, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Margot Barajas, and I'm the 2017 Bausberg Fellow at the Cultural Landscape Foundation. As part of my fellowship experience, I'm pleased to provide testimony on behalf of the foundation. In order to address important issues of design, planning, and public space at the National Register eligible Pershing Park, designed by landscape architect M. Paul Friedberg, with a subsequent planting plan by Uma van Sweden, let me first cite urbanist William Hawley White, quote, "Friedberg's designs are full of overtly useful features. Pershing's Park in Washington is a virtual compendium of them. It is a series of traffic islands along Pennsylvania Avenue linked to form a linear park. As in so many of his designs, there are a number of changes in elevation, unified with water and a plenitude of built-in seating. People like this place. As with other notable small spaces, it appeals to people who come in groups and enjoy activity, as well as people who just want to sit or read. The carrying capacity of the park is very high, even in summer. Washington's dreadful Augusts might temper usage, but the design does everything possible to make you think otherwise. What with the water, the plantings of the canopy of foliage overhead, the place looks cool, even when it isn't." White continues, "His water features, for example, are composed to draw people into it, to splash their hands in it, to dangle their feet," end quote. Pershing's waterfall and pool are one inseparable landscape feature located in the heart of the park. One need only look at earlier images of the park when the waterfall was well maintained, the pool was full, and cascading water provided animation. The park was a popular destination that was embraced by the public. The waterfall's gushing sounds, the white noise masking the adjacent traffic, and the cooling mists, all absent from the now proposed World War I Memorial revised concept plan, were keys to its success. In this proposal, the waterfall is to be replaced by a 65-foot-long sculptural wall. That is too long in its current location. Collectively, the visual and physical barrier created by the insertion of this wall, backed by a pool with sheets of running water down its shorter northern and southern sides, the corresponding loss of more than 50 feet of open physical and visual access between the upper and lower western plaza levels, the loss of more than 80% of the tree canopy on the pool's western edge, the severed relationship between the southern and western staircases, the introduction of new walks within and across the pool, changing the pool's shape and diminishing its surface area by more than 40%, and the loss of the dynamic, animating qualities of water that are fundamental to the park's feeling would result in a less successful urban design. Echoing this concern, in a June 25th email to Phoebe Liquar, Forge Landscape Architecture, Mr. Friedberg noted, "To say that I was disappointed in the design presented to the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts on May 18th, the restored pool concept, would be a gross understatement. All the more so after the positive feeling that was generated when we met in New York. I appreciated that several CFA members suggested we finally meet and thought that the first meeting with the design team produced a common goal and understanding of how a World War I memorial could add a layer of content and experience that would both enhance the park and memorial. It was unfortunate that the World War I Centennial Commission's vice chair, Edwin Fountain, and the memorial's sculptor, Sabin Howard, did not attend. Their absence from our discussion may account for the design outcome, the persistent and intrusive one-note wall that's being forced into the space, thus obliterating the scale and meaning of the original design. I can only assume that the design team was forced by the insistence of the client, the World War I Centennial Commission, to shoehorn in at all costs the wall. The negative impact on the overall design is too much to pay and unnecessary. The rejection of the numerous previous designs by the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts should have sent a clear message that forcing a solution with a preconceived result was not working, and any preconceived notion would be a burden on creativity. It takes a good client to produce a good design. The World War I Commission has presented and then rejected a design proposal, the upper wall design, shown on their design evolution plan that is worthy of revisiting. It would retain the existing waterfall and pool and site the 65-foot-long wall along the elevated north-south walk behind the waterfall. Depending on the height of the wall and the waterfall, this memorial gesture could be seen from multiple vantage points throughout the park. This concept could also address other issues identified by the World War I Commission as important: accessibility and visibility within and through the park. The current proposal does little to ameliorate accessibility constraints cited by the Commission in their September 2016 presentation. By contrast, having the wall on the elevated terrace overlooking the park and the waterfall basin, where it would be directly accessible from Pennsylvania Avenue, would better satisfy contemporary ADA requirements than the circuitous and less safe route proposed in the restored pool concept. Should members of the Commission have any questions and or comments, I would be happy to convey them to Charles Birnbaum, the Cultural Landscape Foundation's president and CEO. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barajas, very much. Please. Ms. Barajas?
Yes.
Just a question about the comment about the loss of more than 80% of the tree canopy on the western edge. I'd like to understand that because I can't see it from what materials we've been given.
I think that Matt might be more qualified to answer that question.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the 80% refers to, if it's just for that portion of the park, so I'm not sure that I know either.
On the pool's western edge is what it says.
Looking at this image, you're talking about the trees that are provided in this section of the park.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to convey that question to Charles and to get clarification for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Darwina Neal?
Good afternoon. I'm Darwina Neal, and I'm a landscape architect who retired from the National Park Service as Chief Cultural Resources of National Capital Region. And because I've submitted comments before, I'll just provide a quick summary today. Although this design is billed as the restored pool concept, this is a serious misnomer. Rehabilitation would have been a more apropos treatment description, but it does not achieve that either, because in reality, it would not only destroy the existing fountain, which is the major focal point within the central room of the park, but it also compromises the pool itself. It is commendable that the berms enclosing the park would remain intact, but the proposal to replace the existing fountain with a 65-foot-long sculptural wall, put a pool behind the new memorial wall with what appear to be side sheets of water that would not even be visible from the pool area, let alone heard, change the size and depth of the pool, and cover about 40% of its surface with new walks. All of these would have extreme adverse effects on the integrity of the existing park design, because the existing fountain is the integral focal feature of the pool area within this significant historic landscape, so that removing the fountain with its animating and cooling effects would essentially remove the heart of the park. The so-called reasons given for many of these changes is that plantings have become overgrown and built-in mechanical elements have not been properly replaced or maintained, so people don't use it. However, since the basic, well-designed framework for the park still remains, there is no excuse for abandoning the original design, which is a significant work of landscape architecture by master landscape architects. Rather, it should be rehabilitated. Demolition by neglect should not be tolerated. Instead, I would urge consideration of the upper wall design, which was rejected by the World War I Commission. This design would locate the commemorative wall along the upper north-south walk behind the fountain. Excuse me. This placement would require little change to the existing park features. Most important, the focal pool and fountain would be retained in place with the wall visible above the fountain as viewed from the pool area, where it would be directly accessible from 15th and Pennsylvania Avenue northwest corner and visible from Pennsylvania Avenue. Instead of the flagpole, the existing kiosk could be replaced by an information kiosk, perhaps an interactive one. So the kiosk could increase visitor use and education and enjoyment. Rehabilitation of the existing park as designed with minimal changes would also considerably reduce the cost of the construction and speed the approval process, perhaps. Whatever the design, it is critical to maintain the fountain, which is the heart of the design, and when working, pumped life into the focal pool and plaza, creating a vibrant public space that anchored the west end of the grand ceremonial Pennsylvania Avenue between the Capitol and the White House. And I would hope that this fatality could be brought back to life. Thank you. If
Thank
there's
you
any
very much, Ms.
questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
Thank you. We may have questions as the meeting goes on.
Okay, one comment quickly.
Please.
Part of the loss of canopy at the west edge of the park might be the removal of the crepe myrtles that are in the steps now. He might have meant that replacement of those. That would be 80%.
Sure. Thanks so much. So we'll return discussion to the commission. Mr. Shaw.
Yeah, so I keep on thinking about the term urban park, and as we had mentioned before, this is the intersection of tourism, workers, and residents, and so the ability for this to be activated and used in a new way, almost a living memorial in some ways, because it is going to need to be a place that needs to be activated for the daily use of DC residents and for DC visitors. So I know we keep thinking about the pool, and that's beautiful, but to me, I'm trying to think about that northern edge by the Willard and by the Plaza and the ability of that to be functioned. Also, we never have a south view to the Wilson Building. I'm tired of seeing the north to the Willard, and we've brought this up before about the need to have stronger connectivity to the Wilson Building, to Freedom Plaza, to the White House Visitor Center, that this really functions as the center of something and not the edge. And so I would really sort of push us to think about those in terms of programming. And then just on a note, looking at the sculpture, it doesn't feel like a very contemporary narrative. I just want to say that I don't see a lot of women here. I know you can't really do a frieze of people of color, but the idea that this is sort of a very antiquated narrative, and if we're thinking about contemporary memorials, we need to have contemporary representation. So I just want to put that out as a point of personal. Thank you.
Please, Mr. Cash.
So I have kind of a list here. The one thing that I would say that I think is most important in talking to the chairman of the council, and I mean, he was here back in the Wilson building when this actually functioned and the water feature worked, and it was a nice place on a day like this to go out there and actually be able to eat lunch outside or something. So I think the biggest thing is the water concept really needs to be restored. And I'm a little bit wary of that because I remember we had a tour about a year ago of the site, and I seem to remember Park Service saying that the existing engineering, mechanics, and all that, that's a big challenge just in and of itself. So I think that's a challenge with the park, but I think it's something that to keep the current design and a water feature is really important. A couple of other specific things. I think I had mentioned last time that I thought that the only real memorial aspect that's been added here is really the wall, and it just kind of feels forced that there's not much else other than it being etched on right next to the wall saying this is the World War I memorial that really even has a lot of memorial aspects. I think that there's not been a lot of creativity around that. Also with the kiosk, I think that functionally there's an issue because that's the access to all that guts and mechanical and all that stuff, and there's actually possible programming or just office or maintenance space down there. So if you remove the kiosk, put a flagpole on it, you might lose some of that, especially if we're now looking at this and keeping a lot of what's there. And the flag just seems kind of like not a lot of thought put into it, just a big flagpole in the middle of a ring of trees that already exist there across the street from two other giant flagpoles that are currently in Freedom Plaza. So it seems like if you're looking for additional memorial aspects, that could be a space, if you're thinking about getting rid of the kiosk, that some more creativity and thought could be put into doing something other than just putting another flag there. Couple other things. So I think that one of the overall issues here is that the way that the process has happened. I mean, I was going back and I looked at our earlier packets and looked at the weight of sacrifice, which is the original, which was the winning concept design, which has nothing really to do with this other than it sits in that square. I think the three original finalists were like a big Arc de Triomphe type something. There was something that was a lot more curving paths and all that stuff, and the winning design was essentially open space, a lot of greenery, and I think that's why people like that, because it preserved open space and a park space. But since then, we've kept saying we want to keep putting more and more of the original design, the existing design in there. And I think that what started out as a project to look for a new World War I memorial has actually turned into a preservation project of the existing park looking to add an additional element. So I question whether or not at this point, given that the really scope of the entire project has changed to a preservation project of the existing, if maybe you shouldn't just go back to the drawing board and do a design competition to look for designs for restoring the existing with adding in new elements. Because I mean, at this point, the design competition, we've gone from, I mean, we're nowhere near what we started with any of the three concepts. And I mean, the entire scope of the project has changed to a rehabilitation. So I just think that all the problems that we've been talking about kind of are linked to the fact that this has been a design that's been so overworked now to get back to where we are. I think that it might be worth thinking about alleviating a lot of these problems. I'm not going to vote against the EDR or anything, because I think that all the comments in here seek to improve this and get to that idea of improving and preserving what's there. But I really think that it's just we keep nibbling around the edges with each of these new design plans, and we've just gone so far from where we're at. I will say one specific comment to the EDR that I just find kind of interesting, that we request that the applicant evaluate the visual and functional impacts of water features when they're both operational and empty of water. I think that's just kind of acknowledging that we expect that the water feature is going to be turned off most of the time. And I would question when we were restoring the reflecting pool or anything like that, if that would have been one of the requests that we think about in the design and what it'll look like if there's no water in there. I mean, when that's the central feature for the whole design. So I just wanted to throw my thoughts out there. Again, I'm not going to be voting against, because I think that all these comments do seek to improve, but I think that some thought might be given by the commission, the World War I Memorial Commission, to going back kind of to the drawing board now that the scope has changed. Mr. Gallows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's see, I have a lot of comments too. Eric, I was leaving the Wilson building on Monday and went through the park, so I did do that. And I was remarking to myself about how many people actually were going there, because I've taken a personal survey, not a scientific one, and I just have been asking people, do you know where the World War I memorial is? And they always refer to the one from the District of Columbia. They know that one. but they really don't know this as a World War I memorial. And I think that's interesting, especially since my grandfather was a wounded veteran of World War I, and means a lot to me to be able to commemorate that. There's several comments. I think accessibility is one that I'm still troubled by. I find it part of the reason people don't know we have a World War I memorial is because most people don't know how to find this place or penetrate it. It's almost trying to be uninviting is the way I see it. The berming up, the kind of hidden nature, and then even when you're in the space, unless you spend time in the very boring end where General Pershing is and the wall that you don't want to read, because it's just too complicated, you really don't have a sense that this is a memorial about anything. It's an urban park. And I think that if we could enhance that on the as we approach the 100th anniversary of entering the war, I think it would be a good thing. So being able to somehow tell the story, I also agree that it could be a more contemporary version of telling that story, and I like that. I also feel as though that wall is yet maybe constructing another barrier to seeing what's inside. I don't know how, that was one of my questions, is how tall that wall is envisioned to be. Because while there is right now the one waterfall feature that kind of sticks up, as we see in the section here, I do think it'll change the character of the space a lot with a more impenetrable side to it. Is there an answer to that?
Yeah, it's about 10 feet tall.
10 feet, yeah. I just had a comment, Mr. Cash, about the flagpole. It's interesting, because it's so far down, it could be that the flagpole actually acts as a beacon to let you know something's down there. Please come explore that more. I agree generally it's not very creative, and maybe there could be something else, but that. I think accessibility is something I'm focused on. I've walked the steps a couple times now to try to get down in it, and I'll just say it's difficult. I have a size 12 shoe, and just to you're sort of tripping over yourself as you try to navigate a very steep set of steps and seating, which you would, if there was water in there, you would land in the water if you tripped going down. I don't think we're here to talk about changing that, but I've never understood why it had to be the current design, why it had to be that way. I know we're more sensitive now to accessibility issues than we were probably when this memorial was built, so maybe that's the answer. But if we are trying to improve it, it seems like helping to have better access is a very, very important point, as the staff has pointed out. The water not there question, design it so it'll also look good when the water's not there. I think it's a very important consideration, because probably at least 6 to 8 months of the year, even when the water feature is operational, the 6 to 8 months it won't be because of the weather. And so I'd like to see it demonstrate that today it's just sort of a concrete, unfinished pad that's very inelegant, and of course it wasn't meant to be non-operational in summertime, but we have to know. If you read the Post on Sunday, you know that a lot of our water features in Washington are not operational for a variety of reasons, and so it ought to work well, at least in that as well. Can't read my last right. Oh, and then you did say, Mr. Fliss, that the pin oaks on the northern side are being retained, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's a very important part of this, this park. So ultimately, I'd like to just be able to understand better how people will get into this space, how it will be more inviting for people to come here, and then can we enhance the story it will tell about the people who fought and died in World War I? Thank you.
That's right.
I have a couple of questions first. In the EDR, the request that the applicant consider integrating a water feature into the wall. And I'm not sure what you're getting at. Are you talking about like a skim, like a fall in front of the bas relief, or breaking up the wall? What are you asking them to?
We don't get to that level of specificity, but what we're talking about is there is an existing water feature that
Right.
faces the pool that comes and has a certain character to it.
Right.
So to bring that element back in that general location could be a way to break up the scale of the wall. You could consider altering the bas relief narrative. We don't get to that level of detail in terms of our recommendation, but we think that the activity and the character of that element could help address some of the concerns about activating public space and also the scale of the wall and how it's integrated into this space.
Because, okay, my second question was, how does the water move or circulate in the current design?
In the proposal?
Yeah.
Okay. So
in the proposed concept.
So in this scheme, there is water on top of the wall.
And it comes down the
and then
sides.
it comes down the north and south sides into essentially a
These gutters,
channel.
yeah, and
into the big pool.
Okay, I got that part. But how does the water in the pool circulate?
I think that's to be determined. I can turn it over to the design team.
Or is it intended to be a still surface? That's what I'm really getting at. Yes or no, or what? Yes, a still surface.
Similar to how it existed.
Okay. So I must be getting, soft in my old age, but I think that it's important to acknowledge the difficulty of this problem they're trying to solve here, which has been imposed upon them. And, I'm empathetic because, boy, howdy, it happens an awful lot where two big ideas are put unwittingly or not on a collision course for disaster, or impossibility to reconcile. And I think that I agree with the comment from CLF that, and I say this often as I'm bludgeoning people inside GSA to be a good client, because being a good client is absolutely necessary, yes. But a rational program is too. And this is a really difficult problem to solve. It's serving a lot of masters. So many of our projects have to do that. But I don't think it's necessary to get mean about it. And I think the CLF letter is a little mean. I've been to the CP meetings, and as is so often the case, this is fraught with emotion and all of that. But I just want to take a moment to recognize that this is a really sort of vexing problem, or two competing interests that the design team has been asked to resolve. Having said all of that, I don't think it's there yet either. I agree with many of your comments, and I'm sort of focused on the water too, because I'm not sure I think that the wall is as disruptive as other people do. I guess because I think the berms in the original design are so difficult to overcome, and it's in its way an architectural expression of a landscape berm. It's no more, it doesn't impose itself any more than the original enclosing berms, sort of, it's of a piece, it seems to me. However, I do think, I look forward as the design develops to see a little bit more about how the water's gonna activate. And the sound component's really important. And so I know it can be designed to skim down the wall very quietly and create a contemplative space, but I'm not sure that really serves the master of being an activated park space where people are gonna wanna go and hang out and have lunch. So I guess I'm not gonna vote against the EDR either. I think the comments are in it are very good, but I would say, I mean, are accurate and helpful. But the design needs to, to many of your comments, there's a reason that what you say is true. We're nowhere near where we started, but that's because the reconciliation of the historic landscape and the new design it's changed so much. I mean, the intent since this all began. So I would just urge the team to keep going and think hard about your two masters. And everybody try to get along and be a little nicer.
Oh, my.
How's that?
This is.
I'm telling you. Whew, it's been a week.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, as someone who works in the parks world, I find it so fascinating to listen to everyone's reaction to the space. And whether it's an edge or a center, the berms were very intentional to enclose the space and have that depression, so you do feel like you're getting away from the hustle and bustle of the street. And I sometimes think, while we're so focused on you've got to program every inch of the space, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you want a place of contemplative reflection. And I think the existing park worked incredibly well in that way. They could activate it or not with the skating in the winter or what have you. I find what you were saying about the scope really interesting, because to me, I think it's very positive where we've moved toward reconciling these two competing masters, as you were describing. I think we just need to keep working on what we're trying to express here and how, while keeping the integrity of the space. I don't think it's irreconcilable. I think we're getting closer with each of these. And it's interesting to think about this being the World War I memorial site. It was a site to honor Pershing that was included in the park. And now it's becoming a World War I site. So I'm not surprised people don't know where that is. But I think it can become well-known. And in terms of access, hooray for the United States that we are more focused on access with passing of the ADA. So I don't think those are insurmountable problems that we can get people down into the park. I worry about it seems overly contrived to me to have this access from the water where you can walk. So I don't know, that seems to add more difficulty than you need. But I think the wall could be really beautiful, and if you maintain the basic integrity. But I compliment the team and your work with the staff for bringing it closer to what everyone was trying to achieve. It's a very special space, and I think it takes time to get there.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Good luck.
I think you have captured so much of the essence of this project, not just in terms of where it is in the design right now, but the process that we've gone through. And yeah, I mean, there were elements of reinvention, and then there are elements of preservation. And these, we have this constant tension and evolution, and we are trying to resolve so many things. And I think the design team does deserve an awful lot of credit for their flexibility as they've worked through this, because we have, this commission has not seen the design as frequently as the Commission of Fine Arts, and they've gone in to many of those and come out, I think, somewhat disheartened by the review. And I will say also, you want to bring the image back up, just because I hate looking at the gray screen. I feel, I mean, this is often, I think, my role when I'm working with memorial projects, but it's part facilitator, part counselor, and come out of CFA sessions and have to have a quick therapy session to encourage people, because I do think that as we go through the process, the projects get better and the comments are good. And I do feel like it has been expressed here already by at least some of the members of the commission that this is not irreconcilable. I think that there is a way to reconcile it, and I think that the fact that the Commission of Fine Arts actually endorsed the concept last time around is demonstration that they saw that there was a way to make this work. I do think that there is certainly more work that needs to be done in the process, and I think that a lot of a number of these questions are a little bit technical, having to do with how do we manage the water feature, and what can we do to make sure that it looks good when the fountain can't run. Because there will be periods, it won't be 6 or 8 months, but there will be periods when the fountain can't run. We do need to make sure that we have the right ability to support it. So I think losing the kiosk, we lose skate storage space and restrooms, but we don't necessarily lose the mechanical space, which is actually, I think, might be within the behind the wall area there. At least that's where it is right now. It's under the walkway where the red dot is right now. And that presents its other technical challenges. I don't have any real qualms about what's in the EDR either. I think there are a couple of places where the requests are a little bit stronger than I would like, and so I would suggest just a little bit of tweaking. And in particular, I appreciate the fact that, for example, under water features, the commission requests that the applicant consider integrating a water feature into the commemorative wall consistent with the location and orientation of the existing fountain. Yes, consider integrating it means some study of it, and I think that has been done to some extent already, and I don't object to the notion that we would investigate that more. So I'm okay with that kind of language, but when we go back to, I think, the first request under commemoration, where it says, requests the size of the commemorative wall be reduced to improve views across the park, I would prefer that it be the similar kind of language, because I think actually, Mr. Fliss, when you talked about that in your presentation, you used the word consider revising as opposed to request that it be reduced. And I think that, again, that's something that has been studied already, but I think can use further study. That's certainly one of the outcomes at the Commission of Fine Arts. So I would like to suggest that we modify the EDR to use the words, consider reducing the size of the commemorative wall. The second one that I had a specific concern about was requests, this is under visibility and access, the third one, or the third statement, which is requests that the applicant provide alternatives to improve pedestrian access and visibility from the southern perimeter of the site, including widening existing paths and stairs or adding new entry points. I see that there are some options there. We have gone through a lot of work to investigate how do you make the site more accessible from the south, because it does present that berm. And I think that considering alternatives is certainly something that has been done and can be done more, but requesting that these alternatives be provided is just a little stronger than I would like, because I don't really want to get into, presenting the commission with alternatives that have to be, I think we need to, further study is appropriate, and we'd like to come back with recommendations on how to address that. And it may not be radically different from what we see now. Again, what we're fighting this struggle between how do we make it more accessible and more visually accessible from the south side, but how do we retain the important features of the existing park? Because I know that the more that we make it accessible from the south, the more commentary we'll have from the Cultural Landscape Foundation and others about preserving that feature. So that's part of the balance. So again, changing the language to consider alternatives to improve the pedestrian access rather than provide alternatives. So I would make a motion to make those two small tweaks to the EDR.
So on the first one, it is request the applicant to consider reducing the size of the commemorative wall.
Correct.
So,
And then pick up from to improve.
right. So that's a motion.
Second.
It's been
Can I ask
moved
you a
and-
question?
Yeah.
How about, is there, lots of times I know that the water features fall into a state of disrepair for lack of budget support. Is there enough money? What's the funding mechanism for this? I mean, it's not, is there going to be some special fund for this memorial, like a Friends group or?
Not, at this time, nothing's been identified that's really going to work to sustain it. I think that through this process, some opportunities are being identified. So we might be able to work with the bid or with surrounding property owners and things like that to help get a little bit more support than we have right now. I think part of the challenge was that, I mean, we inherited this from the PADC.
Right.
It wasn't designed the way we probably would have designed it, and I think that there were some challenges from the very beginning. And I'm hopeful that as we redesign it, we will address those sorts of challenges to the greatest extent possible so it won't be quite as difficult to maintain. Originally, we didn't want to have any water at all because that's always our starting position. But, you know, we get pushback on that because water is just so great.
Exactly. And and when it is, I mean, I don't think that you're planning for a maintenance failure, but there are winter months and we have to think about that's why skim fountains have become all the rage, because they don't look so bad when they're turned off. But so this is going to be challenging. What?
We looked at that here too.
Yeah. And I want to be very clear. If I said that I thought it was irreconcilable, design is religion for me. I think it can solve everything. You just have to hang in there long enough.
Right.
And I have faith that they will.
Right. Good. Thank you. The second
So-
change.
Well, go ahead, we can take them in a block, I guess.
Yeah. The two changes together?
All right. So it's been moved and seconded that we change, request the applicant to consider reducing the size of the commemorative wall. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Passes. The second one was request the applicant consider alternatives to improve pedestrian access and visibility from the southern perimeter.
So it's really just changing the word provide to consider.
Yep.
But you're.
Is there a motion on that for discussion?
I would move that.
It's been moved and seconded for discussion purposes. Mr. Gallus?
Just for clarification, so we're not deleting, including widening existing paths and stairs? Okay.
No, I mean, those are certainly some of the things that, again, have been looked at and we can continue to investigate.
We strike provide, insert consider.
Correct.
Mr. Chair?
Please, Mr. Shaw.
So I still have expressed that concern that I don't feel like the southern part has been explored as much as I would like it to. And so I like the stronger language of provide some alternatives just to really get the juices flowing and to let us understand and see that as well.
I appreciate that, and I would only promise that our consideration would be vigorous and thorough.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? It passes enthusiastically. Before us is the EDR as amended. Is there further discussion on the EDR as amended? Hearing none, is there a motion on the EDR as amended?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded.
Second.
All in favor of the EDR's amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Continuing with our Memorial Day, we now go to the Lincoln Memorial. Agenda item 5C is comments on the conceptual design of the Lincoln Memorial restoration proposed by the National Park Service, and Mr. Webb is on his way.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The National Park Service has submitted for your review and comment concept plans for the rehabilitation of the Lincoln Memorial, consisting of widening existing doors located on the east elevation, which provide access to the undercroft. The proposed door widening is part of NPS's more extensive rehabilitation project in the memorial's chamber and undercroft. The concept design proposes to improve the visitor's experience at the Lincoln Memorial by providing more functional and compliant entrances to the proposed expanded visitor services area located in the undercroft. The improved entrances need to be compliant with the architectural barriers accessibility standards, which are the federal standards for universal accessibility. These are comparable to the standards set forth in the Americans with Disabilities Act. NPS expects to submit for preliminary and final review by the Commission in 2018. The Lincoln Memorial is located in West Potomac Park on the western end of the National Mall, to the west of the reflecting pool and near the Vietnam Veterans and Korean War Veterans memorials. Zooming in a little closer, you can see that the Lincoln Memorial sits within Memorial Circle, with Constitution Avenue to the north, Independence Avenue to the south, and Ohio Drive to the west. The red arrow indicates the approachway to the Lincoln Memorial Chamber and the terrace area on the east elevation. Here is an image showing the memorial's current landscape plan and the approachway to the stairs leading to the chamber housing the statue of President Lincoln. The arrows indicate the locations of the two doors proposed to be widened within the terrace wall flanking the approachway. These photographs show views looking west towards the memorial, including the approachway and the south and north doors proposed for widening. Currently, only the south door is used by the public for access to the visitor services area in the undercroft, containing restroom facilities, the exhibit space, and the one elevator to the chamber. Designed to honor Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, the Lincoln Memorial was completed and dedicated in 1922. Architect Henry Bacon designed the memorial to resemble a classical Greek temple with 36 fluted Doric columns encircling the exterior and a main chamber for the sculpture of President Lincoln. The Lincoln Memorial was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1966, and today the Lincoln Memorial receives 8 million visitors a year. In 1927, restroom facilities were added to the undercroft, leading to the creation of two new openings in the terrace wall on the east elevation. Bronze doors were installed in the new openings, which were approximately 3 feet wide with a width clearance of only 2.5 feet. In 1977, the south door's width was increased to 3 feet 9 inches with a width clearance of about 3 feet. The north door was not altered. It is important to note that starting in 1974, ramps were added to flank the approachway stairs to provide accessibility to visitor services area in the undercroft. In 1996, these ramps were widened to 9 feet in order to comply with universal accessibility requirements. Now I am going to walk you through the proposed changes while providing staff's analysis. As we begin the discussion on the 3 proposed options to widen the doors, let's look at the current east elevation view again. The red arrows indicate the current perception of the two doors from below the approachway to the chamber. It is important to note that staff's analysis includes considerations to impacts on both the loss of historic fabric as well as visual impacts to the Lincoln Memorial. Most of the scope of the rehabilitation's proposed work will be within the undercroft and chamber and is not subject to NCPC approval. However, we will briefly touch on these proposed changes as they require the proposed widening of the terrace level doors to improve accessibility, egress, and functional requirements to the expanded visitor services area in the undercroft. We will start with looking at the changes to the chamber. These photographs show the chamber. Currently, the Lincoln Memorial Bookstore is located in the chamber's northeast corner. A goal of the rehabilitation is to relocate the bookstore to the undercroft and remove this use from the chamber as it detracts from what is intended as a solemn space of contemplation housing the statue of President Lincoln. A second elevator is proposed to be located in the current bookstore space, providing access from the expanded visitors area in the undercroft to the chamber. This is the existing chamber floor plan showing the bookstore retail space located in the northeast corner, as well as the location of the single elevator currently connecting this visitor services area to the chamber. The proposed chamber floor plan shows the removal of the existing bookstore with a second elevator occupying this space. As I mentioned, the majority of the rehabilitation project for the Lincoln Memorial will occur in the undercroft. These alterations require the widening of the public entrances to the expanded visitor services area to meet MPS's requirements for accessibility, life safety, egress, and functionality. These photographs on the screen show the current exhibit space and elevator lobby, as well as views into the area of the undercroft not visible or accessible to the visitors today. This image on the screen shows the current visitor services area within the undercroft, including the restroom facility shown in blue and the exhibit space and interpretive space in green. The majority of the undercroft, as shown in gray, is not visible or accessible to the public. The red arrows indicate the two doors proposed to be widened. Staff notes that the south door currently provides the single source of public entry to the visitor services area and presents challenges with meeting accessibility and egress requirements. The north door is only used by MPS staff to have access to the undercroft. Here is the proposed rehabilitated undercroft floor plan containing expanded visitor services space, including many more restroom facilities, which are shown in blue, expanded exhibit and interpretive space in green, the viewable area into the undercroft shown in white, the relocated bookstore and retail space in pink, and the second elevator to provide access from the undercroft to the chamber. This scheme would be able to accommodate up to 500 visitors at a time. Again, the red arrows indicate the entrances to the visitor services area in the undercroft. This rendering shows a section of the expanded visitor services area located in the undercroft, including the exhibit space with views into the unimproved undercroft. Before you are three options proposed for widening the doors as shown in this drawing: 36 inches, 50 inches, and 72 inches. All three widening approaches expand the width and require the removal of original historic stone material. All three options meet standards for universal accessibility, and all three approaches include installing bronze doors in the increased openings, similar to the existing bronze doors found today. Staff's analysis looked at how to best balance the function with historic preservation. As shown here, the 36-inch option proposes the least amount of removal of historic fabric and the least visual impact as one approaches the Lincoln Memorial while continuing to use a single door. However, staff finds that this option does little to improve NPS's accessibility and program requirements for the expanded visitors area in the rehabilitated Undercroft. This rendering shows what the 36-inch option would look like with a single door propped open. Now, looking at the second option, this drawing shows the 50-inch opening approach to widening the doors. With this scheme, the doors will be paired and will function more like gates and propped open during public operating hours. This option meets accessibility and egress requirements and would allow two visitors to enter and exit through the widened door simultaneously. However, as the image on the bottom shows, the 50-inch opening would not accommodate a visitor using a wheelchair and a visitor with a child stroller entering and exiting at the same time. This rendering shows how a 50-inch opening would appear when the doors are propped open. While requiring removal of more of the original historic fabric than the 36-inch wide proposal, staff finds that the 50-inch option achieves NPS's desired accessibility and program requirements while minimizing the loss of historic fabric and visual impacts to the Lincoln Memorial. The third and final option proposed by NPS is to widen the doors to 72 inches and increase the height to approximately 8 feet from the current 7.5 feet. This drawing shows how a 72-inch opening with paired doors would appear. And please note that the illustration on the bottom shows a visitor in a wheelchair and a visitor pushing a child stroller could enter and exit through the widened doors at the same time. And here is a rendering showing the 72-inch opening when the doors or gates are propped open. While the 72-inch proposal provides the most optimum approach to meet NPS's accessibility, egress, and functional goals, it is the most problematic in respect to loss of historic fabric and visual impacts. While all three options will require the removal of historic stone cladding and the terrace wall to expand the widths of the doors, the visual impact of the expanded door widths may result in a greater alteration to the visual character of the memorial, as the doors will function as gates and remain open during operating hours, creating a different relationship of solids to voids. In terms of the three options presented, the 72-inch width option, as seen here, encircled in red, doubles the current widths of the doors. This change has the potential to make the openings much more visually intrusive due to the creation of a larger void in the terrace wall and alters the visual character of the approachway. Therefore, it is the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission supports NPS's vision to rehabilitate the Lincoln Memorial and increase the door widths to allow increased accessibility and functionality to the expanded visitor services area in the Undercroft. Finds the 50-inch concept option achieves the desired accessibility and functional program requirements, and recommends that NPS continue to explore the benefits and challenges of widening the doors to 50 inches while minimizing both the loss of historic fabric and visual impacts. This concludes my presentation, and there are representatives from the National Park Service also here to help answer any questions. Thank you.
Ms. Wright.
Does the 50-inch, if this is the only door for emergency egress, correct?
Currently, there's only one door, the south door. In the proposal, both the north and south door would be expanded.
No, but I mean, if you were in that space, in a wheelchair,
yeah,
you could use the north door for emergency egress?
After the rehabilitation, after the expanded.
After?
Yes, not currently.
But and so, what is that? In
I think we need to look at the
linear
overall
feet.
plan.
So if you're in the
go back.
bookstore
Let's go.
and you're in a, I know where it is. I'm just, thinking out loud.
Yeah.
Had some coffee now. Whoever bought the Keurig, thank you very much. I'm back in fighting form. So if you're in a wheelchair and you're in the bookstore and there's a fire, then and everybody's panicking and coming out of the south door who can walk, then your option is because and let's just say, or you've got a stroller and moms being what they are, they'll get there first with their kids. So you can't fit in through the door in the anything but the 72-inch scheme. If mom's there with the stroller, you're stuck going to the north door. But there is a door, right?
There is, in the scheme, there will be two doors. The north and south door will both function for public access once the undercroft is expanded for the visitor service area. Currently, no.
Right, okay, and so what's the width of that stair, the grand stair? What, I don't know.
Audrey?
780 feet? I don't know. Having a,
I mean, the stairs going up to the secretary.
yeah.
I don't know if there is.
Yeah, so you've got, the point I'm
Audrey,
making is that
Would you
you've
come up
got
to the
a track.
microphone?
You have a track to get, if you're in a wheelchair in an emergency. If the door, if the rehab doors are too narrow to accommodate a stroller and, hi Audrey, and a wheelchair, right?
Yes, and we've had some code officials, is this working? We've had some code officials look at the 50-inch option, and they have reservations about it, in terms of exactly what you're talking about.
That's what I'm getting at.
I can't sort of overemphasize the 8 million people that come to this memorial
And growing.
Every year and growing.
Yeah.
And so one of the motivations for expanding the visitor experience in general is to alleviate some of the pressure and congestion that we get in kind of all areas of the memorial. And so, we'll distribute people a little bit more evenly from the chamber and also into this new exhibit space. But we have to get these people out in the event of an emergency.
Right.
And the challenge is, the 50-inch does remove less historic fabric, but we've had code officials weigh in and say, not very well.
Yeah, well, I'm not a code official, but it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. If you're going to, you've got to disrupt historic fabric, why not do it one time and do it in a manner that ensures the safety of the 8 million and growing number of visitors?
So, Commissioner Wright, I was going to propose an amendment to the EDR to address this question. I mean, I think we're okay that the commission has recognized that theoretically 50 inches could work, but it does require further study because we have not gotten all the way through this to determine that, in fact, even though you meet that inch requirement, it may not actually function well enough. And so we are still going through that, and it's not even just about wheelchairs and strollers, it's also about people and
Lots of people.
Lots and lots of people. I mean, granted, it's, we size the doors theoretically based on the capacity of the building, but door widths and threshold depths and things like that also factor into it. And it's, it's not always that straightforward calculation of how many people, how many inches of exit way do you have. So we have to be very comfortable. And of course, we are also not in the business of doing the minimum to accommodate accessibility for visitors, right? We are supposed to be leading in that field and not just sort of doing what we can to get by. We have to set an example. Now, we also recognize that we set an example in historic preservation as well. So we're very sensitive about the, not widening too much. We also, we also considered other options for doing this, all of which were much less palatable than simply widening these doors to this extent. So there's already been a lot of study, but there's still more to be done. So.
Just one other comment, just one encouraging thing about if we are forced to widen these doors, the current configuration does not meet code. The one 36-inch door, is that if you sort of step back from the memorial, the sort of massiveness of the memorial helps us out a lot, because you kind of step back to Lincoln Circle and you can see these doors, but they kind of get lost in the overall mass of what you've got.
I just wanted to add a few comments. So I remember, I've been here for almost 15 years in DC, and I think it took me about 5 years to even understand that there were restrooms and facilities available here, because right now there's the two doors that aren't very big that I think I might have just seen a sign finally or saw someone going in one of the doors. So I think that right now the really small doors, of course, it lends to not even knowing it's there. I feel like that, I know you have to weigh the historic preservation issues with the commemorative elements, but I think that actually widening the doors to the 72 provides that visual cue and seeing people come in and out to go to all the really cool new space that's going to be down there. I'm the one person probably on the dais now that has nothing in his background about planning or anything like that. But I actually opened up the comp plan and was reading through some of the elements that weren't mentioned in the EDR. And one of them is to support the location of information kiosks and visitor centers. And this is like kind of a big new visitor center and a lot of interpretive stuff that's going to be down there. So I think that encouraging and really widening those doors and being a cue that there's really cool historic stuff down here and a whole other side of the memorial that you'd want to see. I think that actually widening the doors supports that more than it outweighs kind of the historic preservation aspect, especially considering that there weren't doors on the original design. And like you said, the massiveness of the entire building, I think that even to see that there's doors there to get people in there, I think that substantially widening them really supports that and gets people in there.
Mr. Gallus. I agree with all those comments. I just want to add that since the intervention's already there, even though they're very small, those entrances, making them now functional just seems to make a lot of sense.
Other comments?
So I guess I'm interested in understanding more about my fellow commissioners' positions on this. I had written an additional note that might replace the last recommends statement and say, notes that the applicant continues to investigate accessibility issues, life safety and building codes, and operational considerations that may affect the opening width that would be needed to accommodate the desired program. I'm getting the sense that maybe the full commission would actually support right now saying that 50 is okay, but even 72 would be okay. With that, we are still investigating what is absolutely necessary, and we would reduce it to the minimum that, that would be required to balance historic preservation with the exiting needs. Does that make sense? I'm seeing a lot of nodding of heads. I didn't write it that way, so maybe could we put off the vote on this and go to the next presentation while we try to come up with the right language? Sure. And then we revisit this. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to huddle quickly with staff to try to figure that out.
So for the moment, we'll go.
Seen this other presentation. So.
Yeah, but yeah. For the moment, we'll proceed to agenda item number 5D, which is comments on the site selection for the National Desert Storm and Desert Shield Memorial. We welcome back Mr. Fliss.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, the National Park Service, in collaboration with the National Desert Storm War Memorial Association, has submitted 2 potential sites for the proposed Desert Storm and Desert Shield Memorial for your review and comment. Congress has authorized the establishment of the memorial, which states that the National Desert Storm War Memorial Association may establish the memorial as a commemorative work on federal land in the District of Columbia to honor those who, as members of the armed forces, served on active duty in support of Operation Desert Storm and Operation Desert Shield. The law specifies the monument will be, the memorial will be located within Area 1 of the District of Columbia. The law also states that the Commemorative Works Act, or CWA, as you know, applies to the site selection and design of the monument. The CWA is a federal law that guides the memorials process in the District of Columbia. At this point in the process, the Commission of Fine Arts, the National Capital Memorial Commission, and NCPC provide agency consultation on potential sites. NCMAC has an advisory role, while CFA and NCPC have approval authority on site and design. NCMAC has already reviewed and commented on the alternative sites, and the CFA will review these at a future meeting. After our commission comments, the applicants will develop designs within the preferred site or sites. In the future, the site and design will return to this commission for preliminary and final approval. So by way of background, Operation Desert Storm and Desert Shield represented a coalition of 34 countries, an unparalleled international effort led by American armed forces to liberate Kuwait. Almost 700,000 American service members participated, and several hundred gave their lives in protection of this country. The operations were seen as a success that restored faith in the prowess of the U.S. military, and as such, the event holds a unique place in history by helping close the wounds of the Vietnam War. Working together, the National Park Service and the association developed a list of criteria to help guide the evaluation and selection of a site for the memorial. These criteria parallel the site selection guidance found in the CWA, but provide an additional detail. And these are shown on the screen in front of you. Particularly important are those criteria for ease of access, a meaningful context, contemplative opportunities, and a safe environment for visitors. Taken together, the guidance from the CWA as well as the applicant's selection criteria offer sound standards for evaluating the site alternatives. So moving on to the sites, as I mentioned previously, the public law permits the establishment of a memorial within Area 1, but outside the reserve of the National Mall. And so on the map in front of you, the reserve is hatched. Area 1 is everything within this bold line, and the two sites that we're going to talk about are located here. These sites include the Memorial Avenue Circle site, which is right here, as well as the Constitution Avenue Terminus site, which is located here. Both of these sites were identified as prime locations within the Memorials and Museums Master Plan. I'm going to walk you through both sites, and then I'll provide you a staff's analysis as I do so. So the Memorial Circle site is located on Columbia Island, just west of the Potomac River and just south of the traffic circle created by the intersection of Memorial Avenue and the George Washington Memorial Parkway. The site is approximately 9.3 acres and is currently mostly open lawn and some landscaping. The site is bounded by a series of highly traveled roads, including the Parkway. Arlington National Cemetery is located to the west. Arlington Memorial Bridge is to the northeast. And then the closest pedestrian access is along Memorial Avenue on the north side of the site. This site is visually prominent, and it's located near several other important memorials and historic sites, including the Women in Military Service Memorial. Arlington House is located on the ridge, and of course, Arlington National Cemetery. As I mentioned, pedestrian access is limited, really due to the lack of signalized pedestrian crossings and also just the volume of traffic on the adjacent street network. Currently, the site is primarily viewed from passing cars. Therefore, staff recommends the Commission find the Memorial Circle site provides a thematic connection to Arlington National Cemetery and other nearby military memorials, but it's challenged by limited pedestrian accessibility. Here are some images of the site today showing both the existing conditions as well as the adjacent road network and the landscape. Without significant improvements to this site's accessibility, it's likely to be perceived as a drive-by site. And further, the nearby road network does present challenges regarding noise as well as safety for visitors. As such, staff does recommend the Commission note the site is located between the travel lanes of the George Washington Parkway, Washington Boulevard, and the adjacent road network may detract from the contemplative and safe environment necessary for a successful memorial. Moving on to the other site, Constitution Avenue site is located at the southwest corner of the intersection of 23rd Street and Constitution Avenue. This is located just north of the Lincoln Memorial. This site is a little bit smaller. It's 3.8 acres and is currently open lawn that's used for recreational purposes. The site is also bounded by some ramps, both for I-66, the Roosevelt Bridge, as well as the East Street Expressway and Rock Creek Parkway. The southern boundary of the site is defined by the limits of the reserve. In terms of context, the U.S. Institute of Peace is to the north, and of course the Lincoln Memorial is located to the south. At one time, Constitution Avenue actually extended to the west and terminated at the Belvedere, which still exists on the Potomac River. And so you can see here some images that show that extension to the water. Again, this connection no longer exists because of the road infrastructure that was installed. These are some images of the existing site. Of course, you can see the Lincoln Memorial in the distance, as well as the Institute of Peace, which is located to the north. As I noted previously, Desert Storm and Desert Shield and the response to returning service members is really seen as an important closure to the Vietnam War era. The location near the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, as well as the future visitor center here, would help reinforce this connection. As such, of the two sites, staff believes this location provides the strongest thematic connection. This location is also the more accessible of the two sites due to its proximity to other significant visitor destinations, such as the Lincoln Memorial and the other memorials and monuments on the National Mall. Pedestrian access is provided primarily on the north, east, and south sides of the site. Staff therefore recommends the Commission find that the Constitution Avenue site provides a pedestrian accessible location in close proximity to the National Mall, along with a strong thematic connection to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. The site is also a gateway to the monumental core, and it's also a location of, as I've mentioned before, a significant amount of existing infrastructure. And this also poses a number of challenges. The existing road network and system of ramps creates problems for connectivity, and further, it does not create an attractive entry to the city. Reconfiguring this area as a memorial could help improve the area's character and also serve as a catalyst for future programming of other spaces. There are several other potential memorial locations in this area. Improving circulation to the site may in turn make those other adjacent green spaces, as I mentioned, more viable in the future. Also, the re-extension of Constitution Avenue in its historic alignment would be particularly beneficial. As such, staff suggests the Commission recommend the proposed memorial design demonstrate how the reestablishment of Constitution Avenue and reconfiguration of the surrounding transportation network could be accommodated in the future. And then before I conclude, I'd like to just mention two other potential infrastructure projects that have the potential to affect the Constitution Avenue site and therefore may impact the location and or configuration of any proposed memorial. First, DC Water, as part of the Clean Rivers Project, is currently working with NPS on the potential alignment of the Potomac River Tunnel. This tunnel is similar to what is currently under construction along the Anacostia River, which is intended to help control combined sewer outfalls. The site is under consideration as a mining site or a drop shaft for access to the proposed tunnel. This project would be implemented between 2020 and 2030, and the site would be restored to lawn after completion, as the majority of the work will be underground. But of course, some of this area would be necessary for laydown during construction. In addition, the Army Corps of Engineers is currently evaluating the site for the extension of the Potomac Park levee, and we're just talking mostly about this area. The earthen berm would vary in height, but would be generally no more than 3 to 5 feet above the adjacent grade. Ultimately, the flood protection system would extend to connect to the 17th Street levee. Given these potential demands on the site, staff recommends the Commission note that several major infrastructure projects are proposed for this site and that these may impact the memorial design, including both the DC Water and Army Corps projects. Staff also suggests the Commission request NPS and the sponsor continue to work with the appropriate agencies to identify any constraints or coordination necessary regarding this location and to provide that information at the next submission. And finally, staff notes that both sites are located in important landscapes with great historic and cultural significance. And here you can just see a map of those resources, again, for both of these sites. The Memorial Circle site, as shown in the top image, is a prominent location along the parkway, and the clearing provides a setting in front of Arlington National Cemetery and, of course, Arlington House, which is on the ridge in the background. The site is also part of Lady Bird Johnson Park. The Constitution Avenue site, which is shown on the bottom, forms part of the setting for the Lincoln Memorial. It is also a gateway, as I've mentioned, to the Monumental Core. The nearby Vietnam Veterans Memorial and, of course, the Visitor Center were both challenged to minimize their impacts on these landscapes. Because both sites are located in important historic and cultural landscapes, including the foreground to Arlington National Cemetery as well as the setting of the Lincoln Memorial, any proposed commemoration should minimize visual impacts to these landscapes and their associated views. And finally, both sites have the potential to be successful memorial locations, but the potential constraints identified through this analysis will require further evaluation as the memorial design advances. As such, staff recommends the Commission request that the applicant develop one or more alternative design concepts for both sites, including variations in scale, placement, and orientation. And therefore, it is the Executive Director's recommendation that regarding the Constitution Avenue site, the Commission finds the site provides a pedestrian accessible location with a strong thematic connection to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, recommends the memorial design show how the reestablishment of Constitution Avenue and the reconfiguration of the road network should be accommodated, and notes that several large infrastructure projects are proposed for the site, and recommends that the Park Service and sponsor work with those agencies to identify constraints and coordinate as necessary. Regarding the Memorial Circle site, the Commission finds that this site provides a thematic connection to Arlington National Cemetery and other nearby memorials, but is challenged by limited pedestrian accessibility, and notes the site is located between the highly trafficked road network, which may detract from a safe and contemplative environment. And then, regarding both sites, the Commission notes that both are located in important historic and cultural landscapes. And finally, given the, as such, the memorial should minimize visual impacts to those landscapes and views. And finally, given the potential challenges with each site, recommends the applicant develop one or more alternative design concepts for both sites, including variations in scale, placement, and orientation to better understand how the proposed memorial will relate to their context. That concludes my presentation. I know we have representatives from NPS, the association here, to also help answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have public comment on this, is that right? Mr. Stump, I'm sorry, yeah.
Mr.
Stump,
Chairman,
welcome.
Commissioners, good afternoon. If you'd indulge me, I'd like to just read a few brief comments from our former Commander-in-Chief regarding the importance of the memorial. I know we're here to talk about location, but I want you to know where we are, where our heart is, and what our team is thinking. Received this recent correspondence from President Bush 41, and he said, thank you for the hard work that you all have done for the National Desert Storm War Memorial. I couldn't be prouder of all the men and women who fought in that war. They are true heroes. I am happy to see that they will have a place to visit that will honor and commemorate their sacrifice and remember those who didn't come home. This is at the heart of our mission, and I just want to share that with you. I also wanted to introduce several speakers that we have on behalf. We're going to start off with Sterling Tilley, who is a United States Marine Corps veteran in Operation Desert Storm. I don't think I see my third speaker. Mike Linetto, are you here? Okay, I don't think he's here. And then we're going to have Harold Chapman, who is the National Commander of AMVETS, deliver some remarks too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Stump, very much. Mr. Tilley, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the Commission. My name is Sterling Tilley, and I am a Gulf War veteran and the proud son of another Gulf War veteran, Sterling Tilley Sr. It is with deep gratitude that I appear before you to speak as one representative of the nearly 700,000 veterans of Operation Desert Storm. It has been 27 years since I was called up for duty on my 21st birthday while studying as a senior in college at Hampton University in Virginia. A few weeks after I withdrew from college, I boarded the USS Vancouver off the shores of Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton in California. These steps would alter the course of my life for years to come. As a part of the 5-month military buildup, I would spend several weeks at sea before reaching the Persian Gulf, stopping only once in the Philippines for additional training. When my battle group finally arrived in the theater of operations, my commanding officer gave us the news of what our mission was and his expectations for us accomplishing that mission. At that moment, it sunk in that combat was imminent. Meanwhile, my father was stationed on base in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, where an Iraqi missile on February 26, 1991, would strike a barracks where he was quartered, killing 27 and wounding nearly 100 more. That same evening, I was preparing to cross the border into Kuwait and would not know if my father was dead or alive for several weeks. But through all of this, I could only think about how my mother was going to deal with all of this if I had died, and at the same time wondering if my father was alive. The last letter I received from my mother had a sense of concern and panic, which weighed pretty heavily on my heart, but I had to stay focused. Because the very next day, or next night, on February 27, 1991, 3 nights after the initial ground assault began, my unit, 3rd Division, 5th Marines, crossed into Kuwait. We would spend 7 days traversing minefields, engaged in multiple firefights, killing the enemy, and taking prisoners as we marched to Kuwait City. The National Desert Storm War Memorial is important for so many reasons, and there are far too many reasons to air out in this short time. However, it is important to note that the sacrifices of Desert Storm veterans are no different and no less important than the sacrifice made at any time before or after Desert Storm. When our fallen came home with a flag draped over their bodies, it was just as devastating as any other time. Whereas the Desert Storm veterans that survived, like all other veterans, bear the scars in many ways. If I may, I would like to draw a connection that the original speaker, sorry, I do not know your name, the original speaker made earlier. As you know, the Vietnam War Memorial was a huge milestone for many Vietnam veterans, like my uncle, Teddy Tilley, who all suffered many years of receiving vicious threats and being called outrageous names like baby killers by their fellow countrymen for defending the interest of our beloved nation and fighting under that flag sitting behind you. I am not old enough to remember any of the difficult things those people endured, but I can only imagine what it felt like after their service. For those veterans and my Uncle Teddy, who is no longer with us, it was a relief for them to see military servicemen and women being accepted and honored with parades and being referred to as heroes. The display of a grateful nation for the Desert Storm veterans, I sincerely hope, healed many of those wounds and scars. Desert Storms also changed the way the American public views and treats our military servicemen and women, a legacy that continues today. As we all know, the war was relatively short, but not before we lost nearly 300 coalition forces and had about 1,200 wounded. To honor their sacrifices, I ask that you approve the National Desert Storm War Memorial Site to be built on the Constitution Avenue terminus area near 23rd Street Northwest. This site is extraordinarily important because of its proximity to the other 20th century war memorials, particularly the Vietnam War Memorial. It would bridge that close relationship between the two wars because many of the senior enlisted and officers in Desert Storm also served in the Vietnam era, including my father. This site would allow us to visit both memorial sites together within steps from each other. Today, I continue to serve our beloved country as a Foreign Service officer at the Department of State, where I work through diplomatic channels to promote peaceful solutions to global issues. I would be remiss if I did not also note that this site is in close proximity to the Harry S. Truman Building, which was the epicenter of the diplomatic effort to build the 34-nation coalition to liberate Kuwait. All of these points together make a substantial case for the Constitution and 23rd Street's location to be the most appropriate place to honor those that made the ultimate sacrifice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Tilley, very much. Mr. Chapman?
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to come and express my support for the Desert Storm War Memorial. I'm an Air Force veteran. I served during the Vietnam era in the Pacific. So, as many of you know, the Vietnam Wall that was chosen, that site that was chosen is tremendous, and the Vietnam era veteran are so grateful for that location. And like I was said, that I'm the national commander of the one of the largest VSOs, Veteran Service Organizations here, and we are very proud of that site on Constitution Avenue, and we'd like to support that. The relationship with the Vietnam Wall is very important because, as you know, there's not too many Vietnam-era veterans here in the room that I can see, being that I'm one of the older of you. But we weren't treated so kindly as we were. And thank God President H.W. Bush had his mind in the right place at the time, went in that war, got it done within 100 hours, and we're very proud of that. And the veterans that served in that war are also very proud of it. And of course, they would like to see their memorial built close to the relationship with the Vietnam Wall. So I'd like your thoughts on that and, of course, your approval. But be very grateful, and all of us veterans that served the country would be very grateful, but especially the ones that served during that era so that their children would be able to see it and their grandchildren and so on. So thank you for your time and patience, and hopefully you'll go along with that Constitution Avenue site. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very moving testimony. Thank you to all three of you. We'll bring the matter back before the commission. I'm sorry, Ms. Neal. Yeah, forgive me. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I do need to say, though, that after that very powerful emotional testimony, I certainly do not question the construction of the memorial itself. All I am doing is really commenting on site selection. And in fact, I submit the recommendations for site selection that have been previously made for the reasons that I'll just summarize and give to you quickly, which seem in some ways a little insignificant to those, in regard to those who fought. Soon after I started working for the Park Service in 1965, I was assigned to the Beautification Task Force to implement Lady Bird Johnson's beautification program in Washington. And during that time, landscape architect Edward Durrell Stone Jr. developed a master landscape plan for Columbia Island, which was approved by both the Commission of Fine Arts and this commission. And that master landscape plan included a variety of deciduous and evergreen trees, dogwoods, and massings of daffodils. The first phase of that planting was done around Memorial Circle because of its prominence in regard to being between the Lincoln Memorial and the Arlington Memorial Cemetery hemicycle and Memorial Avenue. And it was followed by later phases of plantings as funds became available. And this master landscape plan still guides plantings on Columbia Island. But later, Columbia Island was officially named Lady Bird Johnson Park in her honor and a site within the park was selected as the location for the Lyndon Baines Johnson Memorial Grove on the Potomac, which was later added to the National Register. The George Washington Memorial Parkway also runs through Lady Bird Johnson Park, so it comprises a number of integrated, significant cultural landscapes. The Desert Storm and Site Selection Study does not adequately recognize the cultural landscapes that would be affected by its placement in the Memorial Circle area. Also, it assumes contrived relationships between the war memorials along Memorial Avenue and the proposed site. In reality, the memorials along Memorial Avenue are related only to it, not to areas around the Memorial Circle or to the Parkway cultural landscapes. In fact, a war memorial there would be an intrusion on the character of the natural landscape plantings with flowing open spaces between them and along the parkways. Instead, Memorial Circle should remain enframed by uninterrupted landscape plantings as a more natural transition between the Lincoln Memorial and Memorial Avenue. And disadvantages of the access to this location have already been cited in the staff report, so I won't reiterate those. But finally, in no way would a Desert Storm Memorial in this location, quote, evoke the spatial qualities of the Kuwaiti Desert, cited as a goal under the project's design intent. In fact, this is why the Lady Bird Johnson Park Memorial Circle should not be considered as a location for it. And I would ask that the commission recommendations recognize this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Neal, very much. We'll now return the matter before to the commission. Mr. Cash.
I don't know why I seem to have a lot of feelings on these things today, but as someone I've mentioned in the past, I rely completely on metro and buses and walking to work a mile every day, so I pay attention when we talk about pedestrian accessibility. And I really have to say, I feel like there is a thumb on the scale in this EDR about pedestrian accessibility. I'm not speaking to which site I think is necessarily better, but if we're going to be using pedestrian accessibility as one of the criteria, I just looked up on Google Maps while we were sitting here. The closest metro to the Constitution Avenue site is the Foggy Bottom Metro, which is 0.6 miles away, which is a 13-minute walk across 7 to 8 pedestrian crossings to get to that site. It also is in kind of the mixing bowl of the I-66, Rock Creek Parkway, Constitution Memorial Bridge, that whole network of streets right there. So I only mention that because in the EDR's findings, it says that the Washington Island or Lady Bird Johnson Park is next to a bunch of vehicle or streets that make it not necessarily the greatest for memorial contemplation, but I see that the other site has that too. So I understand it's a little bit different because when you're out there on the circle, it's a little bit higher speed, but I think that speaks to some of the problems with that area for pedestrian accessibility in general. I'll just say on the other hand that the street over near, or the site over near Arlington Memorial Cemetery is only 0.2 miles away from the metro, which is a 4-minute walk with only one at-grade crossing, which is a problem at-grade crossing, but I think that there's been studies or looks in the past at ways to improve that for bicycles and pedestrians to even get people into the park. So I don't know if I want to go so far to see if maybe striking that. I just really have a problem with saying that with the weighting with pedestrian accessible, because I really think that they're a lot more equal in a lot of ways than this might give credence to. And I think that in future projects looking out there in Lady Bird Johnson Park, that it kind of detracts from the accessibility that is there with the access to the metro. So for now, I'll just kind of put that out there.
Thank you. Yep. Mr. Shaw.
I think it's the district's talking today. I have a concern in the recommendations around also doing a proposal for extending Constitution Avenue. I just think that mixing bowl is such a mess, and I know that we've been talking about for the 2 years I'm there, that's just such an undue burden for anyone. I mean, we've been talking about for Eisenhower just closing Maryland, but this idea of like resolve, 50 years of traffic mess to make this just seems like a really hard task. And so I don't know what efforts DDOT are doing right now or what NPS is thinking about, but that is such a heavy lift that I'm just not even sure if it's worth, proposing, I don't want to get people's hopes up because I just think there's so many pieces to make that spaghetti work, and then put a water tunnel underneath it as well and think about those other issues that I don't know how we sort of tighten that up and sort of say, here's a site that may work, or just give a little bit more guidance? Because I just don't think it's fair or doable to the design team or to the memorial team.
Yeah. Can I just respond to?
You go first, I'll supplement.
Staff's concern was that there has been some thoughts about reconfiguring this area, and we just want to make sure that if this site is chosen, that it's not precluding in the future other potential improvements. Not that this memorial would solve that problem,
Okay.
but that is the intention.
And if I could say that it is a long-term desire of the Park Service to make the extension of Constitution Avenue a real thing in some form. I don't imagine that we're going to have cars driving right out to the Belvedere anytime soon, or maybe ever. But right now, having Constitution Avenue sort of disappear into a freeway ramp, isn't a great thing. And when you add to that the fact that the pedestrian accessibility from the trail along the river to this area is so problematic. Now, we are looking at that actively right now with federal highways, and DDOT has been involved in that, and so we're studying that, and hopefully we'll come up with some solutions that will complement whatever happens on this site, whether it's this memorial or something else in the future. So we look forward to actually fixing some of that. It won't be the big fix that will get rid of the whole tangle of spaghetti, but just making it easier for pedestrians to get from this site to the river. And that's, I think, a realistic, relatively short-term goal.
Ms. Wright?
I agree. That's the part of the EDR that kind of stuck in my craw too. It seems to, getting a memorial through the process is already pretty daunting. And then you add to that, while you're at it, fix this, half a century old traffic mess that we've created. That is also, and where does that stop, right? Because you're fixing Constitution Avenue, but you've got the Kennedy Center, spaghetti to worry about, Potomac Hill. That's a big ask. So I would be looking to insert a word in there, like they obviously, and they will and should, as good designers, take this into account. So, we like the word consider. I would not object to that. But backing up a little bit, I don't want to rehash a lot of the comments that we've made under the auspices of NICMAC about this location being appropriate, other than to summarize and say, I think, first of all, Mr. Cash, I've been rubbing off on Mr. Cash apparently. So this is a good thing, yeah. Now I just lost my train of thought. Okay. So, and I get that it's overburdened on pedestrian access. I think the EDR could be one of the most important things about the Constitution Avenue site is this thematic connection to Vietnam, and we can't overstate that. The comments that the conversation that we had at NICMAC also took into consideration this notion that we have sort of a, there's a continuum of events that need to be considered in context, and I just think that the Memorial Circle, in addition to Ms. Neal's comments, it seems, and I said this at NICMAC, and I've thought about it, and I don't think it's an understatement. It's disrespectful to put this memorial that far away from the other memorial cluster that it has, that around the Vietnam Memorial and the planned visitor center. It just feels like a hinterland. And we also talked about it at Haynes Point and a number of others. They've done a really thorough site selection, and I think they've landed on the right one at Constitution Avenue, if for no other reason because of the proximity to both the Vietnam Wall and the planned visitor center. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, Mr. Gallus?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really just have a question. We talk about the preference of the association for at least a 1.5 acre site. And both these sites are considerably larger than that. So the clarification really, or question is, are they seeking to limit their design direction to 1.5 acres? This is valuable real estate. The commission has studied future memorials and how we're going to address the demand for memorials that will continue well beyond all of us, we assume. So I just want to know, are we looking to say within the 3.8 acre or the 9.3 acre sites, we're looking for approximately 1.5 acres? And is there any work that's done to demonstrate that 1.5 acres is the right size?
The association has established the 1.5 acres as their target. I know there's some ongoing discussions about that. We are not, at this stage, citing them within the general geographic areas that have been provided to the commission. I know that's kind of a next step, and that's why in the EDR, one of our recommendations is that they do a little bit more work to start thinking about that particular issue.
So I don't know if the EDR should address that. In other words, there's a tendency to spread out, with no disrespect, of course, for our veterans or the people that fought in this war. I just want to be also cognizant of future demands on land that's very much in demand.
Right.
And so.
And to respond to you, we tried to capture that in terms of the request that they look at variations in scale, placement, and orientation.
And does that include demonstrating that 1.5 acres is the right size? I mean, the association has requested, or however it says here, it says their preference for 1.5 acres. And so how do we get to what it is or what it needs to be? I know it's early, but in terms of direction from the commission.
Let me try to speak to that. So the commission has voiced that preference. The Park Service hasn't necessarily endorsed it. And I think that one of the things that we are trying to keep in mind as we consider this is that it's not just the area that is taken up, the built area of the memorial, the landscaped area of it, but that there be sufficient setting and buffer around it, right? And clearly, if this memorial were located at the Constitution Avenue site, it's really going to be the only one that's in that landmass that's right there. It's not like we're going to be adding more memorials right within that 3.8 acre site.
Doesn't the floodplain dictate that the design needs to be tucked up in the corner anyway?
No, not necessarily. We're looking at moving the current diagram of the levee, which shows it sort of cutting across the site. We actually think it can be moved further to the west and would allow a more generous area in which it could live. Besides, the levee structure itself is really, I mean, it's just a rise in the ground level. It's not going to be a really obvious structure. It's not going to box it in. And we want, of course, this memorial to be outside the floodplain. So, but one of the things that could happen at the Memorial Circle site is that with, potential future roadway reconfigurations, there could be other memorials in that vicinity. Certainly that was contemplated in earlier consideration of where memorials could be in the 2M plan. All that being said, I think that the actual requirements will be something that we vet as we go through the design process. We want to make sure that it's something that fits well in the context and also is something that, you know, we can maintain in the long run. Those considerations will very much be in the mind of the Park Service as we vet the actual design.
The only thing I wonder, I know you, with authority, you kind of said there will never be another memorial next to this. And I don't know. You're pretty, I respect you a lot, Peter, but 100 years, 200 years from now,
But
we
look
don't
at the
really know.
floodplain.
No, I understand, but there may be different kinds of memorials that sit above a floodplain, or there could be all kinds of things, so.
No, you're correct, and we.
I just want to urge.
We built other memorials within floodplains, so that isn't necessarily a limiting factor. But when we're this close, we want to be out of the floodplain. And I do say it fairly definitively, and a lot of times I have to say things very definitively, and whether they actually stand up, you know, in the test of time, I don't know. And 100 years from now, I'm pretty sure I won't be doing this.
That's why I bring the caution, I
Yeah,
think, for the
no,
future.
But I think it's a valid consideration. You know, the Congress did decide that nothing else should be built within the reserve, and we are right on the line of the reserve. And there may be moments in the future where the Congress changes its mind about how commemoration is done and give us different guidance on how it shall be. I'm hopeful, though, that the notion that we don't overbuild with commemoration in this area is something that will stands the test of time. And I think that putting something else in the 3.8 acres would be overbuilding.
Mr. Shaw.
So I just have one more thought, and this is thinking about the proposed levy system. I just feel like also maybe the recommendations are a little tame, because as we think about memorials of the future and we think about this proposed infrastructure changes, is there an opportunity to sort of not rethink the memorial, but understand the idea that if it's already a rise space for the levee, how that can be incorporated into a potential design, or if this does go to Memorial Circle. So I still think that there's opportunity there, and you know, I'm happy there's historic landscape, but you know, it's gonna have to be a really big deal if it goes to Memorial Circle, because it may sort of set the precedent for other memorials in the future. I mean, or I think about the Air Force one that like sort of shoots up and stuff like that. That there may need to be some more guidance that says Memorial Circle, you got to zhuzh it up, you got to turn it up a little bit higher, right? Or understand that, and then for the Southern Constitution to really understand, explore the opportunity of integrating into existing infrastructure. I mean, or maybe when you have the desk talks with them, that may be some direction to get things going.
Yeah, we agree.
Mr. Chairman, I don't really have anything more to add to the discussion. I appreciate what's been said so far, and I think that what's in the EDR in terms of what the staff is recommending is acceptable from our point of view, and I am open to the notion that we would change under the recommends statement. We change the word demonstrate to consider, and would. If Wright would want to make that motion, I would second it. Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded, and this is under Constitution?
Yes.
Proposed memorial design, you said consider?
Consider.
Consider instead of demonstrate.
Yeah.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
And then unless there's other discussion, I would move the EDR.
Actually,
Okay.
Cash?
So, I mean, this is less in the context of this project, but I really just, partially with what Ms. Neal said in her testimony, just how great the Lady Bird Park is, and I think it's an underutilized area that people use to go out and explore in the district, and actually is a part of the district that most people don't even understand that it's within our bounds. So I think that, not in the context of, I think that we're trying to weight the recommendation one way or another, but I really think that under Memorial Circle findings, taking out that last phrase of the sentence saying that it is challenged by limited pedestrian accessibility, because I really feel on its face, number one, in comparison to the other location, it's not any more limited, but I think in general, us having a finding here that it's limiting accessibility discourages kind of future uses there, even future people going out there checking that out. So I think more limited than my original comments, but I would just move that we strike the phrase, but is challenged by limited pedestrian accessibility from the Memorial Circle site.
So following up on that, though, I don't think this is an issue of pedestrian accessibility as so much as it is about pedestrian and vehicular conflicts. And I do think that is something that is a consideration at that site. So I would suggest that perhaps we might want to change it to but it is challenged by pedestrian vehicular conflicts.
Where is this? I'm sorry.
So that it doesn't talk about vehicular conflict at this point. I think going back to the comments, it's really about that one crossing to get over essentially into the circle.
It's a very, very serious problem.
And it is, but going back to the context of looking at both these sites, there's also 7 pedestrian conflicts from the other site, but
right. But those are all controlled intersections. I think that's the key difference. I mean, this is that area of the parkway is a real problem because we have a lot of pedestrian and users and a lot of cyclists, and we've had some very, very bad accidents because you have multiple lanes of vehicles approaching intersections with pedestrian crossings, and somebody slows down but the other lane doesn't, and then bad things happen. There are things that we're looking at to try to fix that, and certainly if the memorial were approved in that location, that would become a very high priority. It would be a requirement that we try to fix that. And I think that's really what I assume what the staff was trying to capture. So I wouldn't want to just erase the statement. I agree it doesn't capture the right thing because it is more accessible to pedestrians in terms of the distance.
what if I were to then, instead of striking it, and this is only adding 3 words and striking another one, so say, but is currently challenged by pedestrian vehicular conflict.
Yeah.
And strike the word accessibility.
Well, it's also, what I'm getting at is that it's not the distance, it's sort of a psychological distance. During the NICMAC conversation, we talked a lot about tourists who have a limited time. You're here for a certain amount of time, you're walking, it's hot, you're not, and that's where the combination of thematic proximity and sort of psychological distance, if you will, kind of combine, for me anyway, conspire against the Memorial Circle site.
Right.
It's not necessarily, number of steps on your Fitbit.
Oh, sure. And I think just to be fair, since we are kind of trying to do an apples to apples thing here, then I think that it's fair to say that it is currently challenged by pedestrian vehicular conflict.
Okay.
Is there an opportunity, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, to almost the same way we asked to consider the alignment of Constitution as part of the expiration for Memorial Circle as a consideration for
That's why I didn't necessarily want to
resolving
get
that
into.
as well? If we put that in for one, I don't know why we wouldn't ask for that as a consideration for the other.
What would you propose for Constitution Avenue?
No, so we have right now, we ask as part of this that we consider reconfiguration in those, that for Memorial Circle, that we ask them to consider, some ways to resolve that pedestrian vehicular issue. So we actually we asked them to take the same action that we're asking them to do for Constitution.
Yeah, I think that will have to happen.
Okay, well, if we're being explicit in one, it'd be helpful.
No, I don't object to being explicit about it. But yeah, recommending that the proposed memorial design consider modifications to the surrounding transportation network to accommodate the memorial, and adding that as another statement.
I'd be very supportive of that.
I'm confused. So you're saying that the monument should make those modifications or take them under consideration?
Under consideration.
I just think we need to be really clear in the language.
Yeah, no, consider how.
Got it.
It's
So almost the same language we use for Constitution, we just replicate that for Memorial
Well,
Circle.
wouldn't that just go in the both sites category then?
Okay, well, that
And
works
just
then.
Say it once for both.
Okay.
Well, the Constitution Avenue one
A
is
little bit
is specific to the continuation of Constitution Avenue, as opposed to resolving pedestrian conflicts. Did you capture what I rattled off there? Okay.
Yeah.
Want to try to read it?
Give it a try?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. This would find the Memorial Circle provides a thematic connection to the cemetery and other nearby military memorials, but is currently challenged by pedestrian vehicular conflicts, and recommends the proposed memorial design consider modifications to the surrounding transportation network that could be accommodated in the future.
Consider changes to transportation networks.
Yeah.
I think.
For accessibility, to address those concerns.
Is that going to be a second recommends or part of the same?
I thought it was.
It would be, a separate statement that's another recommends statement. I'm sorry, can you read it one more time?
Okay, I'll just read the last part. So it's
Just recommends.
recommends the proposed memorial design consider modifications to the surrounding transportation network. And then what I heard was to address accessibility?
To improve pedestrian accessibility.
Okay, to improve pedestrian accessibility.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be very much in favor of that. I think it's actually an improvement.
So
while that's on the table, you want to recommend, move that?
I'll move those changes.
I'll second.
It's been moved and second. Any further discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The second amendment we had was under Memorial Circle fines, and that last phrase, currently challenged by pedestrian vehicular conflicts. I presume pedestrian vehicular is hyphenated.
So I would move that too.
I'll second.
It's been moved and, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
I would move the EDR
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on the EDR?
as amended.
As amended. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the EDR as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you very much. So we're back to 5C, which is the Lincoln Memorial for purposes of an amendment. I'll say that after we do this, we have 2 more action items and then 2 information presentations.
All right, Mr. Chairman, we have the following language proposal for the recommendation. So we would strike both of the current findings and propose a new finding as follows. Finds the 36-inch option does not achieve the desired accessibility and functional program requirements of the National Park Service. So that would, so striking the 2 finds, adding that 1 new find, and then under the recommends, it would say recommends the applicant continue to explore the benefits and challenges of widening the 2 doors up to 72 inches, and then the rest would continue while minimizing loss of the surrounding historic fabric and minimal changes to the visual impact to the Lincoln Memorial.
Okay. So the First Amendment would be simply to strike the 2 fines. We can take that in a block. Is there a motion on striking?
So
the 2
moved.
fines? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. So the 2 fines are struck. So then there is amending the recommends to say, I'm sorry, there's a fines of 36 inches, option, does not achieve, et cetera. Does anybody need to read that again?
Finds the 36-inch option does not achieve the desired accessibility and functional program requirements of the National Park Service.
I would move we make that change.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on that item? All in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And then the last one is to amend the recommends, I think was to strike 250 inches and say up to 72
That's correct.
inches.
Can you read the whole thing, please?
You bet. Recommends the applicant continue to explore the benefits and challenges of widening the two doors up to 72 inches while minimizing loss of the surrounding historic fabric and minimal changes to the visual impact to the Lincoln Memorial.
Can't it refer to, for accessibility purposes? The reason for doing that?
So it's up to 72 inches for accessibility purposes?
Yeah, it's partially about accessibility. It's also partially just about egress, which isn't necessarily just an
Say
accessibility.
accessibility and egress. I think the reason for doing it is very important to
That's
us
fine.
wanting to
Yeah.
expand it.
That's fine.
So it would now read, widening the two doors up to 72 inches for accessibility and egress purposes.
That's fine. I would move that.
Second?
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Adopted.
I would move the EDR as amended.
EDR as amended, it has been moved and seconded. All in favor of the EDR as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. It is adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. So agenda item number 5E is comments on the revised concept design for the cladding replacement at the National Air and Space Museum. And I'll note for all that the many members of the commission and staff went back to the National Air and Space Museum today to look at samples and such again. So we did another field trip this morning. We thank museum staff for their hospitality.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Lee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. Smithsonian Institution has submitted a revised concept design for the cladding replacement at the National Air and Space Museum. The museum is located on a 10-acre site on the south side of the National Mall. The site is surrounded by Jefferson Drive to the north, 4th Street to the east, Independence Avenue to the south, and 7th Street to the west. The museum is a contributing building to the National Mall Historic District, which is highlighted in purple here. The current submission is part of a larger project that involves significant improvements to the building exterior, vestibules, and site improvements. As you may recall, in 2014, the Smithsonian provided an information presentation to introduce the project to the Commission. Last summer, the Commission conducted a site visit to the museum and provided comments on the concept design for the site and security vestibules. Later in the spring, the Commission participated on a second field trip to review the mock-up of exterior cladding options, followed by an information presentation. This morning, as the Chairman mentioned, we conducted a third site visit to review an additional cladding option and are here today to provide comments on the revised concept design. We anticipate the entire project to come back for preliminary and final review in December. So the project objectives are to protect the museum's mission, replace the exterior envelope with a material that is compatible with the original design of the building and has a lifespan of 100 years with proper maintenance and meets requirements for energy performance. Select materials that accommodate the project schedule while allowing the museum to remain open during construction. Maintain eligibility of the museum to be listed to the National Register of Historic Places, upgrade utility systems, and enhance the visitor's experience. The building was designed by HOK and constructed in 1976 as part of the United States bicentennial celebration. The design intent was to create a building that was in harmony with the character of the National Mall and reflected the architectural elements of the surrounding buildings, while also pursuing modern architectural principles. The building has a simple design consisting of 4 83-foot tall limestone cubes separated by 3 recessed atriums. Here is the existing site plan. As you can see, the building has a massive scale. It occupies 3 city blocks and includes an alteration of stone and glass. The stone cladding, shown in orange, continues inside the atriums of the building along Jefferson Drive, and the interior cladding will remain. 65% of the overall building facade is enclosed with stone cladding, and 35% is enclosed with glass. The glazing replacement will be part of the future submission. Cladding replacement includes the building exterior walls and terrace walls, but as I mentioned, it does not include the walls within the interior of the atriums. The National Air and Space Museum has a strong visual relationship with the west building of the National Gallery of Art, located directly to the north across the National Mall. The National Air and Space Museum responds to the west building through the cladding, through the massing and exterior cladding. Both buildings are clad in Tennessee pink marble limestone using a similar stone panel size and horizontal panel orientation. As you can see in this image, the museums facing the National Mall use different cladding materials. However, they all have a warm color palette that contrasts with the U.S. Capitol. There are other structures on the north side of the mall clad in Tennessee pink marble limestone. In addition to the west building, the east building facade, as well as the piers and benches of the sculptural garden of the National Gallery of Art, use Tennessee pink. A few blocks to the west, the National Museum of American History is also clad in the same stone. While earlier museums tried to blend in and relate to each other through the use of similar cladding to unify the entire mall, recent museums have been more expressive of their missions using unique cladding materials. So in order to meet a limited construction budget and open on time for the bicentennial of the United States, the building was value engineered, and the result was a non-traditional construction composed of a light steel frame support cladding instead of using a masonry backup wall. In addition, they used a thin stone panel and applied spray foam insulation directly to the back of the stone, which has created thermal issues and major stone failure. You may wonder why the National Air and Space Museum is different. Well, the other buildings on the National Mall, clad in Tennessee pink limestone, have thicker limestone panels supported on a masonry backup wall, which has allowed them to last. For example, you can see here a comparison between the National Air and Space Museum and the National Gallery of Art East building. The National Air and Space Museum has a 1 1/4-inch thick stone panel on a steel frame, while the East building has a stone thickness of 3 inches supported on a masonry wall. If you recall, in 2011, the facade of the National Gallery of Art was restored. The stone was removed and reinstalled due to issues with the anchoring system, but not issues with the stone itself. 41 years after construction, the exterior stone cladding of the National Air and Space Museum must be completely removed due to significant warping and cracking caused by the original wall assembly. Tennessee pink marble limestone, the existing cladding, is a unique limestone characterized by a wide color range from light pink to medium cedar and fine linear veining. Across the National Mall, the tone variation emphasizes horizontality, modulates the facade, and makes the building appear less massive. At a close distance, the horizontal striations of each panel are detailed and provide a more human scale. Smithsonian analyzed over 80 different stones and several manufactured materials over the last 2 years. Smithsonian analyzed the different alternatives in accordance with 4 selecting criteria. In terms of aesthetics, they look at color, pattern, and tonal variation, and whether a particular alternative was similar to the characteristics of Tennessee pink marble. They also look at the contrast between the new cladding and the existing Tennessee pink in the interior of the atriums, and also analyze historic preservation considerations. Second, in terms of technical performance, they look at durability and whether the material could last 100 years, be suitable for application on a light steel frame, and resistant to mold and algae. Regarding procurement, The material should be quarried within North America and fabricated within the United States. And lastly, in terms of risk, the material should be available in a sufficient quantity to accommodate the construction schedule. In 2016, Smithsonian created a short list of 5 cladding options based on the cladding selecting criteria. The 5 shortlisted options included high-performance concrete, Echo Lake granite, Tennessee pink marble limestone, St. Clair limestone, and Colonial Rose granite. You saw the first 4 cladding options last April at the site visit. Colonial Rose granite has since been added, and you saw it this morning during the field trip. Keep in mind that the colors in these pictures may vary from the actual mock-up. So we find that Tennessee pink marble limestone is the most appropriate cladding material based on aesthetics and historic preservation criteria because it offers a combination of pattern and color range appropriate for a monumental building where the cladding is one of the main architectural expressions. However, we also recognize that these are not the only criteria informing the cladding decision. Since the mock-up was installed in late March, Smithsonian conducted additional analysis regarding the technical performance of each option. And Smithsonian has arrived at the 4 following findings. First, Tennessee pink marble limestone has technical performance issues, both because of the building's metal frame and the stone itself, and therefore it is not a long-term solution. Second, limestones have durability and maintenance challenges. Limestones are generally less resistant to pollutants, mold, and algae, and require additional cleaning. While thicker panel of Tennessee pink marble or another limestone could address the issues associated with technical performance, there is no example of a successful long-term performance application of limestone on a light steel frame without masonry backup. And last, granite is more durable for a light steel frame application and provides a better long-term solution. Granite is also resistant to pollutants, surface mold, and algae, and allows a more aggressive cleaning. Therefore, Smithsonian has selected Colonial Rose granite as their preferred stone because they have found it is the best long-term solution and provides the best overall value considering all the criteria. Here you can see renderings showing the proposed cladding with the vestibules that we saw last summer. And here you can see some precedents of Colonial Rose. The first example is the BYU Museum of Art in Utah. The cladding shows color variation and pattern. The other 2 local examples, one at the roof terrace of the East Building and the National Japanese American Memorial, the cladding show a predominantly uniform pattern. While Colonial Rose granite has a warm pink color comparable to existing Tennessee pink marble cladding and is durable, it is also a very homogeneous stone, lacking the wide range of color variation and horizontal striations that characterize Tennessee pink marble limestone and make the museum's facade interesting. Here is a rendering along Independence Avenue showing Colonial Rose granite and also pictures of the mock-up. Upon consideration of the Smithsonian's findings, staff supports Colonial Rose granite as the preferred cladding alternative and strongly encourage increasing the percentage of stone panels with color variation and horizontal pattern in the design specifications to avoid a monolithic facade. Here are pictures of the 2 different finishes available at the mock-up site. The first one has thermal finish with a rough texture. The second one has a sandblasted finish with a smoother surface similar to existing finish on the building facade. In terms of finish, staff supports the sandblasted finish because it provides a timeless effect in keeping with the existing building. I note that Smithsonian will develop an additional mock-up of Colonial Rose granite to evaluate the technical performance of the wall assembly. Therefore, they should continue to consult with NCPC staff on any future mock-up of Colonial Rose to test different combinations of color and veining as well as the glazing mock-up. And so with that, the Executive Director's recommendation is for the Commission to find that Tennessee pink marble is the most appropriate cladding material based on aesthetics and historic preservation. However, the Commission also recognized that these are not the only criteria Note that Smithsonian analyzed over 80 different stones and several manufactured materials in accordance with the selection criteria that included aesthetics, historic preservation, technical performance, procurement, and risk. Note that the shortlisted options included Tennessee Pink Limestone, St. Clair Limestone, Echo Lake Granite, Colonial Rose Granite, and High Performance Concrete. Note that since the shortlist was developed, Smithsonian conducted additional analysis regarding the technical performance of each option and has arrived at the following 4 findings. First, Tennessee Pink Marble Limestone has technical performance issues and it is not a long-term solution. Second, limestones have durability and maintenance challenges. Third, while a thicker panel of Tennessee Pink Marble Limestone or another limestone could address the issues associated with technical performance, there is no example of a successful long-term performance application of limestone on a light steel frame. And fourth, granite is more durable for a steel frame application and provides a better long-term solution. Note that Smithsonian has selected Colonial Rose Granite as their preferred stone. Find that Colonial Rose Granite has a warm pink color comparable to existing cladding and is durable. It is also a very homogeneous stone, lacking the wide range of color variation and horizontal striations that characterize Tennessee Pink. And upon consideration of Smithsonian findings, supports Colonial Rose Granite as the preferred cladding alternative and strongly encourage increasing the percentage of stone panels with color variation and horizontal pattern in the design specifications to avoid a monolithic facade. Support the sandblasted finish and request that the Smithsonian continue to consult with NCPC staff on any future mock-ups. So with this, I conclude my presentation. Smithsonian and their design team are here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee. I'll note that we are simply commenting on that which we originally commented on quite favorably in July. Right, July of 16, yeah. And I'd say that the museum should be commended for their obviously terrifically in-depth research they've done on this. It's been a lot of care taken to it. Are there additional comments on this, Mr. Shaw?
So, Mr. Chair, just before we vote on this, I know that the Historic Preservation Office has been pushing Smithsonian really hard on the Tennessee Pink Marble. And so these are 2 processes happening concurrently, but I'm happy with the EDR on this, but just wanted to make sure that there's still that out there.
Sure, understood. Mr. Gallus?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you again for the exhaustive work to try to find a solution. It's really great to see the work and to involve us the way you have. I think that the selected Colonial Rose sandblasted finish is pink enough. The building must read as pink. I think that's what makes it such a warm and wonderful, and it's barely pink enough, I think. But I do think that in weighing the alternative with the non-sandblasted, the other finish, the building also very much reads as a smooth facade, and I think the one on the left just wouldn't give the same overall appearance, even though it looks pinker, in my opinion. And so I am in agreement with the EDR. Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Additional discussion? Is there a motion on the EDR?
I move to accept.
It's been moved and seconded. The EDR has been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you very much. We're down to our last action item.
Thank you.
Agenda item 5F is the preliminary and final building plans for Terminal B and C redevelopment, securing National Hall and a new North Concourse at Ronald Reagan National Airport. Mr. Hart.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority has submitted preliminary and final building plans for the Terminal BC redevelopment project at Ronald Reagan National Airport for Commission review. So this is not from the National Park Service or the Smithsonian. The immediate context around the airport is shown in this slide. I've also included the image, the map on the left, which you're probably aware of. Both Dulles International Airport and Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport are under the purview of the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. Taking a closer look at national, there are a number of federally controlled lands here that are included, including north of the airport is East Potomac Park, Gravelly Point, the unfortunately named Roach's Run Wildlife Refuge, Dangerfield Island, and the Sailing Marina are south of the airport. And then to the west is the George Washington Memorial Parkway, which borders the National Airport. So NCPC's review role here is not a typical one because we are only to determine if the project is consistent with the 1988 MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, that the Commission signed with the Airports Authority. Under this MOU, NCPC is to determine if the project would, quote unquote, alter the skyline of National Airport when viewed from the opposing shoreline or from the George Washington Memorial Parkway. In addition, the Commission is to determine if there will be any impacts to nearby federal land, these being the ones I noted earlier, Gravelly Point, Roach's Run Wildlife Refuge, Dangerfield Island, or the Sailing Marina. And the main impact here would be a visual impact. So the Airports Authority submitted these projects for a few reasons. First is to improve and consolidate the security checkpoints at the airport. So these are where those two new screening checkpoints would be located. And the second is to improve the existing facilities for regional flights arriving and departing from the airport. I'll note that there are no additional air traffic, there is no additional air traffic associated with this expansion project. The Airports Authority notes that this North Concourse is really just to better accommodate existing flights. So for this presentation, I'll first discuss the proposed secure National Hall screening buildings and show where they are visible from various federally owned land. The areas for these new screening buildings are shown in this slide in orange. These are areas that would be located beneath the elevated departure roadways and above the arrival roadways. And as you can see, these screening areas will flank or they'll be adjacent to the metro entrances, which are here and here. This is the metro track that serves, metro station that serves Washington National Airport. So here's a diagram showing the layout of the airport, identifying the existing screening checkpoints. You can see that the red areas are the secure areas, which are basically where the piers go out. You either are offloaded or board your airplanes. And then these points, the stars, are the actual checkpoints to get to those secure areas. And the Airports Authority is consolidating security and moving it out to include the main part of the terminal, that portion here, and I'll toggle back between the two so you can see the change. The main concourse, this area here, will be within the secure area once this project is constructed. There is, and I'll note that there is interior demolition that is necessary for the project to remove the existing security checkpoints. And I'll also note that there won't be a change to the security at Terminal A as this has an independent area and it's outside the project scope. So I'll start with an elevation of the new north screening building and then and also the floor plan for the screening buildings. You can see that the new screening facility, this building is actually here, that portion here. It is 62, almost 62 and a half feet in height. The existing terminal, which you see these structures here, that is actually almost at 78 feet. So this new screening facility would be shorter than that, than the existing building. This that you see here is just the north screening facility, which is a blow-up, I guess, of this portion of the plan. The other side, the southern security facility is shown here as well, and it's just a kind of a reverse of what this design would look like. The ticketing will remain on the upper level, and the lower level will remain as a baggage claim area. So here are the perspective renderings showing the proposed project, and you'll see the existing facility in kind of a yellowish color here in the middle ground, and then circled is the north secure area, the screening area. And the Airports Authority has stated that it will be clad in a glass curtain wall and have an undulating metal roof. And they're saying that it is reminiscent of the existing architecture, not totally mimicking it, but trying to be close to that. Again, 62 feet in height, which is less than the 78 feet of the existing terminal. Another image, again, looking towards the east. You see the airplanes and going to the main terminal here, and this is the north screening facility as well. The southern screening facility is just a little off the screen, but it would again be the kind of opposite view of this. So as I noted earlier, according to the MOU, NCPC is to review the project to understand if it would impact the airport skyline as seen from the George Washington Memorial Parkway or from across the Potomac River from East Potomac Park. There are only two places where the security buildings would be noticeable, and I know this is very difficult to see, but it's kind of through the trees, and it's very, very minimally visible from George Washington Memorial Parkway, which is where this is taken from. This is another image. There are buildings and other structures that make this very difficult to see from the parkway itself. And while I won't show these views, staff has determined that the new screening facilities would not be visible from the other federal properties, including East Potomac Park, Gravelly Point, Dangerfield Island, the Sailey Marina or Roaches Run Wildlife Refuge, and this is due to their locations between the existing terminal and the Metro Rail station, and the fact that the new facilities, the buildings, will be approximately 15 feet lower than the main terminal building, so it's kind of nestled in there. So next I'll move to the new North Concourse building. The existing conditions are shown here, and they consist of two large hangars. There's hangar 12 and 11, as well as the office building for the Airports Authority. As I noted earlier, the proposed concourse building is not being constructed to accommodate additional flights, but to replace outdated facilities and improve passenger loading and unloading of existing regional flights. The existing hangars are fairly tall at 72.5 feet. The proposed North Concourse building will be just under 50 feet. The offices that are being accommodated are being accommodated once this building is removed, either in existing facilities on at the airport or in nearby leased buildings. So the new concourse plan is shown here, and please note that the proposed pier will be similar in layout to the existing pier. This is just to the south of it. The hangar and office buildings have been demolished, as you can tell. And I'll also note here that the new concourse is closer to the existing terminal than were the hangars. And this image here shows where the existing hangars and the new, office building are located. It's just an outline of where that building is. So That was the extent of where the hangars are, and this is the extent of where the new pier is going to be. And that is with respect to where George Washington Memorial Parkway is located. The next few images will show the facility in comparison, this new facility in comparison to the existing facilities. This is a view, again, from George Washington Memorial Parkway, and you'll see on the existing view the hangar 11 and 12, and then the proposed, the Airports Authority has provided images of kind of a massing in this orange area where the new, how tall the facility will be, and it's actually smaller because it is located farther away. And because of this location of the new facility at the northernmost portion of this the airport, staff find that this change will be a positive one. We do note that it will change the skyline, airport skyline, but it will be a positive one since the new facility will be smaller and located farther away from the parkway. Here's a view from the wildlife refuge. Again, as you can see, the new North Concourse, which is this area in orange, is smaller than the hangars 11 and 12. And so it would be, again, a change because these would be demolished and removed, but it would be a positive change as well. Again, another view from, here's a view from Gravelly Point, which is just to the north of the airport, hangars 11 and 12, and then the new North Concourse. Again, there would be a change, but that change would be a positive change, less impactful than the existing hangars. So here's a view from East Potomac Park during the day on the left-hand side and in evening at the right-hand side. And staff find that the new concourse, again, would be less impactful than the existing hangars and the office building. And as with the previous project, the secure screening facilities, staff, I'm not going to be providing other images showing the new North Concourse building from Dangerfield Island or from the sailing marina because we found that because they're located south of the airport and this is north of the airport, they are not visible from those locations. And finally, bird's eye rendering of the new North Concourse building, which is here, and the connection to the existing terminal, which is here. And in summary, staff analysis shows that this new facility will make a change on the skyline of the existing airport because of the demolition of the existing buildings and construction of the new building. However, staff see these as positive changes to the airport skyline as the new structure is shorter than the existing building and will be moved farther away from George Washington Memorial Parkway, which is the closest kind of federal facility. And with that, it is the executive director's recommendation that the commission find that the terminal BC redevelopment and the demolition of the two existing buildings would have a positive impact on the skyline of the National Airport as seen from the George Washington Memorial Parkway and from East Potomac Park. Further find that the proposed projects would not have a negative impact on the existing federal lands and therefore approve the preliminary and final building plans for the terminal BC redevelopment, secure National Hull, and the new North Concourse projects located at Reagan National Airport. And that concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. May?
Can you bring up the aerial view with the new facility? The new terminal, there we go. So what we're seeing here are a number of airplanes in the place where the hangar used to be, and no, down the white area.
This area?
Right, so there are airplanes in that area. And what I don't know necessarily is, I mean, is there an impact from airplanes taxiing in and out of that area? Because they're bringing them in some ways closer to the parkway than might otherwise be happening, particularly, when proximity to the trail and things like that. Was that taken into consideration?
We have the Airports Authority here. They can answer questions.
Oh, good. Can you bring back the image with it ghosted in there, so we see the other building?
If you could just introduce yourself for the.
I'm Richard Turnham, staff architect with the Airports Authority, and I have Louis Lee, who's worked on administering the project with me here. So your question is whether the aircraft is going to be closer to the GW Parkway?
Well, whether there's any impact, I mean, obviously aircraft is getting closer to the access road there, right? And, because there was the terminal, I mean, there was that hangar structure. And I just wonder whether there was whether in fact there's any impact associated with the new presence of aircraft in that area on the parkway that we see at the bottom of the picture, or to the left.
Well, there's aircraft there now. So
Not in the white area right now, there's a building. So there aren't aircraft, if there are aircraft in there, they're blocked by the building.
Right.
So.
There are some that are physically closer than when we had the building there.
Right, so, and then what I'm wondering is if there's any actual effect from that.
Well, let me chime in.
Why don't you step a little closer so we can all hear you?
My name is Louis Lee. I'm also staff architect with Memoria. So to address your question, yes, your observation is correct. There's a building there, and in the future, the building will be gone. But the view from the GW Parkway to the apron to the beach area will still be shielded by a glass wall. So
by a what wall?
It's a glass wall. It's a glass fence.
Blast?
Yes, it's for aircraft.
The buffer, the same thing that we have along the rest of the parkway.
But we envision that will be slightly different from what you're seeing today.
Good.
Yes.
But there are walls there now.
Yes, there are fence and that glass wall you see today, but
Right.
Because of the site constraint there, what we are envisioning there would be a opaque glass wall made up of either concrete, metal panel. The material is yet to be determined, but the key is opaque, so you don't really see that from GW Parkway.
So is it possible, you already have a significant extent of that along the parkway, toward the middle of the image on the left, and then extending further out to where the runway is. And it's a very narrow portion of the parkway and the trail. And so I'm wondering, in the new blast wall that you're putting in, first of all, concrete, metal, I mean, they can be very beautiful things, but they're not really parkway kind of things. So are you thinking of including plantings that would go in with that to buffer it as well?
Yes, there's a landscape plan we have in mind to soften that edge. The boundary of the airport between.
All right. And is there any hope that the blast wall that we see sort of extending up and out of the picture might also be improved in a similar fashion? Because it's really, really, really unpleasant.
It is something we can consider, but there's a point that the existing chain link fence will be made adjacent to the parkway.
Right.
There will be a point of transition between the so-called opaque glass wall and the chain link fence.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think improvements in the area of the chain link fence would be possibly welcome. I mean, I don't know, I haven't talked to anybody in the park staff about their concerns in that area. Have you talked to anybody at the GW Parkway staff as well?
I think that our entire presentation that was turned into federal park planning has been sent to the parkway also.
So sent to them?
And
Yes.
I have a comment on this
Yeah.
as well.
The same presentation.
I actually spoke with Tammy Stidham,
Okay.
and she actually talked to the
Okay.
George Washington Memorial Parkway staff and was reassured that they did not have any concerns, and that was relayed
Yeah, but they don't necessarily know what they're concerned about, so.
I was just saying that they did actually have a conversation with them.
Okay. I will want to have another conversation with them about it, and we may want to get back in touch with you about it, see if there's more that can be done, because it is an area for improvement. I mean, it's a really, unsightly glimpse of the airport, frankly, to see the backside of that blast wall as you're driving through in a car to get to the airport. And it is, as I said before, with 3 wheelies, how really bad it is on the trail there. So take note of that, and hopefully we can make some improvements. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Other discussion or questions? Hearing none, is there a motion on the EDR? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the EDR, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And we have it. Thank you very much. Yep. Yeah, how about that, 4:30? That concludes our agenda items. We have 2 information items on the agenda to round out the day. First information presentation is the Washington Union Station Expansion Project. We have Mr. Fliss returning to us. We see our old friend, Mr. Zayden, here. Welcome back. It's nice to see you. Mr. Fliss.
Thank you, and I'll be very quick. The Federal Railroad Administration of the Department of Transportation is here today to provide you an overview of the Washington Union Station Expansion Project. I know most of you are all familiar with Union Station, located in Northeast Washington, D.C., just a few blocks north of the U.S. Capitol. Here, of course, is the existing context. You have the historic rail building, the rail yards, parking, and other transportation-related facilities. There are some other federal facilities close by, including the SEC, Smithsonian Postal Museum, and of course, NPS administers Columbus Plaza, which is located in the front. The building was designed by Daniel Burnham, who was a member of the Macmillan Commission, and it was completed in 1908. This building was placed on the National Register in 1969, of course, as a central hub for rail transportation and other forms of transportation in Washington, D.C. This commission has reviewed several projects related to Union Station. These include perimeter security, metro station access, as well as comments to the District of Columbia Zoning Commission regarding the Union Station North zoning district, which was created for the 14 acres of air rights, which are located above the rail tracks behind the historic Union Station building. The Union Station Redevelopment Corporation, in coordination with Amtrak, has proposed expanding and modernizing the multimodal transportation facilities at Union Station, and the comprehensive plan states the importance of developing and maintaining multimodal transportation system that meets the needs of residents, workers, and visitors. FRA is developing concepts which will ultimately be evaluated through the NEPA process, and NCPC is a cooperating agency due to this commission's review over projects on federal land. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to David Valenstein with the FRA, who will walk you through the project, where they are in the process moving forward. I can advance.
long-term plan to rebuild station facilities behind the historic building, rebuilding tracks and platforms, passenger concourses, parking, bus facilities, and support spaces. I'm glad you can hear me now. So the key stakeholders for the expansion project and the EIS process are the Federal Railroad Administration as the owner of Union Station and lead agency for the environmental review process, the Union Station Redevelopment Corporation, and Beverly Swaim-Staley here is the executive director of the Union Station Redevelopment Corporation, is a nonprofit, and FRA has leased the facility to USRC for 99 years for maintenance and oversight. And USRC is the project proponent for the expansion project, while Amtrak is a partner with USRC on the expansion project. I think you already heard that you're a cooperating agency, the Commission is, as well as Federal Transit Administration, the Park Service, and the District Department of Transportation. The purpose of the expansion project is first and foremost to support current and future rail services. Amtrak will be expanding and increasing Acela service over the next few years. Commuter demand is very strong, and FRA has just completed a corridor-wide planning process for the Northeast Corridor, yesterday releasing a record of decision that establishes a vision for the next several decades of increasing rail service and approximately doubling intercity rail passengers and tripling commuter rail passengers, along with longer and more frequent trains at Union Station. This project is intended to be consistent with that long-term vision. Modern station infrastructure will be accessible, will improve customer experience, and integration of the station with other modes in the surrounding city. All this must be achieved while preserving the historic building and ensuring its continued economic viability. Needs for the project are driven by the deficiencies and obsolescence of the railroad infrastructure, particularly the platform configurations, which are too narrow. And the project addresses these needs with wider platforms that are fully accessible, with a mid-platform concourse and multiple passenger access points to enable faster boarding and alighting of larger numbers of passengers. Next slide. This graphic shows the general location where the station expansion project is anticipated to occur. The project requires track realignments to support the flow of trains to and from the station, and therefore extends far north beyond New York Avenue. Next slide. The NEPA and Section 106 processes have specific milestones and steps illustrated here. FRA is holding public meetings at key points during the process shown with circles. We held our most recent one in the late fall of 2016. And the Section 106 process is being coordinated with the NEPA process. We're currently in the alternatives and evaluation phase. So following public and agency comments on station concepts in the fall, FRA, USRC, and Amtrak have considered refinements to the concepts focused on station program issues and design considerations. We are now identifying preliminary alternatives and will be releasing a concept screening report within the next couple of weeks. Over the next 6 months, additional planning and design will address constructability and other issues to support the identification of alternatives that will be evaluated in the EIS. Next. I'm pleased to share the preliminary alternatives with you today. Many key elements of the preliminary alternatives are the same. They're shown in the top. Over the past couple of years, Amtrak has worked extensively to develop a feasible track alignment and platform layout for the station. This is common to all of the alternatives. Other features that are common are below-track concourses, integration and preservation of the historic station building, and street and taxi integration. The alternatives focus on variations for how to replace the bus terminal and parking, and different ways to create a world-class train hall, a large, naturally lit, iconic space for both trains and passengers. Next slide. With preliminary alternative 1, a north-south train hall would connect the historic station building with the H Street Bridge. The bus terminal would remain approximately where it is today in federal property. Parking could be above with preliminary alternative 1A, or as in the next slide, parking could be below, and there's potential for real estate development that could occur above the bus terminal. Opportunities for private development, both planned as part of Burnham Place and proposed in federal property, are shown as volumes consistent with zoning envelopes in these images. However, what is shown does not represent building designs. Next slide. All the alternatives retain and rebuild a main concourse located behind the historic building. Today, this is known as the Cladding Concourse. The preliminary alternative 1 train hall then extends north from the main concourse to H Street to the right. Passengers on platforms in the center of the station would experience this north-south train hall. And what you see here is vehicles on the deck, sort of adjacent to the outside of the north-south train hall as a pickup and drop-off location. The trains below that, and then below that, concourses. Next slide. With preliminary alternative 4B, the train hall expands east to west behind the existing station, and parking is below the tracks. A bus pickup and drop-off lane is located between the historic station and the new train hall. The main bus terminal is nestled under the edge of private development north of H Street. Opportunities for private development, including some on federal property, are north of the train hall. Okay. Relative to the other preliminary alternatives, the train hall is the most spacious in preliminary alternative 4B. It would encompass both the main concourse and the ends of the trains, and the train hall experience would be available to all to passengers going to all of the tracks. Preliminary alternative 5 combines an east-west train hall with a stacked bus terminal. Again, opportunities for private development, including some on federal property, are to the north of the train hall. Next slide. In this view, you can see how the bus terminal wraps around the train hall skylight and mezzanines connect different levels. One design consideration will be to seek to minimize impacts from immediate adjacencies with the historic building. It's possible in this preliminary alternative that the bus roadway would not be fully covered as shown in this image, reducing the impression of the train hall volume on the outside. Thank you. Our schedule has the refinement of the preliminary alternatives continuing into the fall, focused on constructability, and this is likely to result in changes to the preliminary alternatives. The draft EIS is expected to be released in about a year. The final EIS and record of decision in early 2019. And as relative to the Commission's purview, station project proponents anticipate an NCPC submission for preliminary approval in 2019. And with that, we'll take questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ballenstein. Questions for, please, Mr. Cash.
So a lot of this project, there's a lot of moving pieces with it. I mean, we have the Amtrak piece, the Burnham Place piece, and a lot of these others. One thing you didn't talk much about was the H Street Bridge and the approval process for that, because that has to be completely replaced. Is that included with the EIS for this project, or is that its own Section 106, all that stuff on a separate track?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the district government plans to reconstruct the bridge on an earlier schedule, and they are currently engaging a design consultant for the bridge project. And I believe they intend to go through the clearance process for that bridge on a separate process, but to be accelerated, I would assume.
But you're confident that the district at this point, with the plans, the latest you've heard, that they will not be a hindrance in order to get the rest of the redevelopment moving, or you're not worried at this point?
No, I'm not particularly worried about it being a hindrance, provided we can, I mean, we have very good cooperation with the district and meet with them monthly on this to coordinate the projects. In terms of construction, the duration of construction for the station project is likely to be quite extended. So the H Street Bridge project would be considerably shorter.
Please. You mentioned, was it Slayton Concourse, or what was the name you gave?
The Clader Concourse.
Clader.
It's the name given to the current train concourse.
Is that, what is the, I can't tell from the sections, I need to study them more, but the connection to H Street and the light rail there, how is that being facilitated through this?
So there are plans for a number of paths for connection. First of all, below the tracks, there are plans for concourses running sort of north-south, so connecting from the main station to a concourse under H Street. And there are also plans, say, with preliminary alternative 1, with the north-south train hall, there would be walkways in the train hall running north-south. Sure.
Mr. Cash. Actually, speaking of that, the underground H Street, that reminds me back when, it seems like decades ago, when the streetcar project was first proposed for the district, what they were looking at doing was using the old H Street tunnel that exists below the train tracks to actually be the terminus and where the barn was going to be essentially for the streetcars. But then this project seemed to overtake that, saying that you needed access to that entire H Street tunnel that already exists under the Hopscotch Bridge and under the tracks. Is that tunnel use still in all of the alternatives, or is there an alternative in which you all don't need that tunnel?
Yes, the use of that space would be common to all of the alternatives. An east-west concourse under H Street is a critical component to all of the concepts and alternatives. It provides a mid-platform point of access, vertical access to all of the platforms, and could alleviate quite a bit of the crowding that we experience.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a very important project. And I'll be at Union Station in about 45 minutes. I hope.
Count on it.
Yeah, that's right. The last item on today's agenda is information presentation on our in-progress parking study being conducted with the Volpe Institute. Mr. Wills. Wow, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. As you may remember, back in January, staff provided a brief report to you about NCPC's parking study that we had initiated back in October of last year. Currently, we are now at a point in the study process where we wanted to come back and provide some more detail on the study itself, its organization, purpose, some initial observations, and some information on the remaining steps and study process schedule as we approach its conclusion. Starting off with a little context, all of our comprehensive plan policies, which include our system of parking ratio goals, are ultimately designed to support the 3 core planning principles that you see before you here on this slide. As you know, within the comprehensive plan reside 8 different elements, one of which is the transportation element, and one of the transportation elements, roughly 55 policies, is the parking ratio goal policy. Our parking ratio policy has its origins back in our 1969 comprehensive plan, which had policies that sought to control the parking supply at varying levels in different parts of the city, including the central employment area, as well as the fringe and uptown areas of the city and suburbs. The policies allowed for more parking in locations that were further out from downtown, in recognition that accessibility generally declined the further out one moved from the center city. The parking ratio system was initially articulated in the 1989 comprehensive plan with 4 different ratio zones: a 1-to-5 zone for the central employment area, a 1 to 4 zone for the historic District of Columbia boundary area, plus Alexandria and a portion of Montgomery County, a third zone with a 1 to 2 ratio for further out parts of Montgomery, Prince George's, and Fairfax County, and a fourth zone with a 1 to 1.5 ratio encompassing the remainder of the region. Our current system was established through our 2004 comprehensive plan, and here for the first time we see the 1 to 3 ratio around metro rail stations and a 1 to 2 zone near HOV facilities. In addition, the current system maintained the 1 to 5 zone for the central employment area, established a reduced 1 to 4 zone for the historic District of Columbia area only, and established a 1.5 to 2 range for the remainder of the region. The intent of this system of goals is to encourage federal campuses and installations to limit parking supply as a travel demand management tool to encourage federal employees to undertake more sustainable travel behavior, and to free federal campuses from the cost of providing parking in locations with existing or planned regional access improvements in the future. So with that 28-year history into our commission policies, we will report back to you in a few months in the fall and bring any sort of policy amendments that may come out of this.
To any destination. That sort of pendulum started to come back towards the middle of the spectrum in the 70s, 80s as the energy crisis happened and more environmental awareness after the first Earth Day, and eventually moving from transportation policy and modeling focused on strictly moving vehicles from an origin to a destination to moving people to destinations. And so that's sort of a multimodal approach focused not only on automobiles but also
area, people attempting to reach that red zone, the blue areas would be able to reach that zone by transit within a given amount of time. The white could not. Transit access to speak of. As you then move toward the core, you see this green area where you start to have some minimal level of transit access, but still mostly people are going to be incentivized to use a car. Then you have sort of near parity with a sort of greenish blue, and then as you move into the blue, transit becomes more and more plentiful, and people are able to access more locations using transit than a car. So that one value is very important, where you transition from cars can access more to over one now transit can access more. So focusing in on the core and the broader changes to the region, the MWCOG model incorporates changes to the transportation network, both the roadway side and the transit side. On the transit side, there are some notable changes between now and 2030, so Silver Line extension and the Purple Line. With those included, there are some localized benefits, but also you are opening up the possibility for more people to access the core. So ultimately, we have a significant increase in this darkest blue area, and also that darkest blue, the top end goes up. So we have, at most, in the 2016 case, a ratio of about 3.5. Then that goes up to about 4.5 in the 2030. So we have a notable increase in that core. So the second finding, we have this figure. So this is showing a relationship between the accessibility ratio, just shown on the map, coming out of the MWCOG model, and the actual parking ratio that these federal facilities are achieving. So you can consider along the x-axis here, going from very little transit on the left to transit is becoming more and more prevalent and then preferential on the right. And then as you move from the lower side to the top, you're going from places which have a lot of parking provisioned for their staff to more and more restrictive policy, right? So looking at these 20 facility points on this map, we find that there's this fairly strong linear relationship between those two factors with a predictive power of about 62% when all of these are included. There are some outlier facilities that have some special things going on, which we're continuing to examine carefully. If those are excluded, then that predictive power is very high. It's about 90%. Okay, finally, this third item. Looking at the historic DC boundary, we see from the map that there's really a wide range of conditions across these different zones. So you have certain TAZs which are right in the core and have the highest accessibility ratios, have lots and lots of transit, are very densely built and very walkable, very bikeable, have lots of access. And then you have these other outlying areas that are still within the historic DC boundary, but are much more suburban, much more neighborhood oriented, and do not have, in some cases, virtually any good transit access. Yet all of those fall under the same 1 to 4 zone target from NCPC.
Thanks, Stephen. So I mean, I think, as we said in the beginning, this is just kind of the initial look at some observations from our study, continuing to work with NCPC staff to sort of process what this all means and what the numbers mean. We're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into some issues surrounding end-of-line Metro Rail station areas and the accessibility associated with shuttles and so forth with the different facilities. We're also going to look at potential modifications to the 1 to 4 boundary that Stephen mentioned, and just try to sort of suss out what the implications could be for different facilities in the region, and give staff some ideas on implications of those. And then finally, take a closer look at those outlier locations that Stephen mentioned, and sort of take a look at some of those potential variance processes that I alluded to in the local parking comparison part of the study.
Thank you very much. As everyone knows, the parking ratio is a big deal here, and it frequently comes up. So we thank you for your work. Do we have any questions for our Vulcan friends?
Yeah, where should we put the FBI building?
That was just a joke.
Across the street.
Just say, I want to quote the vice chair, the east of the river. I'd like to see that bluer, and this is actually a wake-up call for us as a city, and we're doing a lot more in connectivity on Georgia Avenue and Wisconsin with express bus lines that we just invested in. But this is definitely something we need to be. 4 of us are on transportation planning board as well, so this is definitely something that should be shared with them, because as we think about the regional investments we're doing as well. So.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Thank you very much for being with us. You endured the day. We apologize. But to my colleagues, thank you for enduring the day. We've had a very productive agenda and a lot of important items to a lot of Americans with these memorials. So thank you very much. And we are adjourned.